And we are rolling. I am here today with Jerry Marzinsky for the third time. Thank you so much for returning. It's what you share is so powerful to me, and I think that the way you came about it and how you discovered it is just such a fascinating story. And just for the people that weren't here the last two times, if you could just give a little summary about your story.
Well, I guess the summary of the story is I discovered that the voices weren't hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia insists. They're entities, and it took years to discover that. I didn't want to believe it myself, so just kept poking around in the heads of schizophrenics until my denial system completely collapsed. It just completely collapsed. So I've worked in every mental health facet in 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 our country. I mean, I've worked in mental health centers. I've worked in the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet, in Central State Hospital in Georgia. That's where I started off. There were 10,000 patients there when I got there, down from 23,000. I worked in county hospital ERs. I worked in mental health centers. I spent 17 years working in the psych department of a state prison dealing with the criminally insane. I was a contractor. The last 10 years I spent working as a um, what we guess psychiatric assessor in the ERs in the major hospitals around town, and now I'm in private practice. So I've seen it all. I've been on every facet uh, there is in the mental health community.
Well, thank you so much for coming again. And your story is so to me right now. What's happening, kind of across the world, is a lot of people having experiences like that in their own, whether it be healthcare fields or education or whatever. Did it change the way you look at your spiritual life? Were you a spiritual person before that?
I wasn't unspiritual. I was, you know, I wasn't a Bible thumper. I believed in God, but boy, I tell you, the more what these voices were came out, you know, the more it was like, okay, if this is a negative side, there's got to be a good side too. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a dualistic universe. You have black and white, hot and cold, light and dark. I mean, and I was seeing the dark part. I mean, none of these institutions would the average guy be able to get into. It was they just wouldn't let you in. So the state hospital I worked at, I mean, it had 200 buildings and like 3,000 acres. I mean, it was the size of a small city. And on the outside, it was perfectly manicured. It looked like, it was a great place. They had some modern buildings, they had some classic buildings, and they had these big brick buildings, which the average person could not get into. They would not allow them onto the wards. Um, so and tell you the truth, I've never saw a researcher anywhere in any of these institutions. They would not let them in. You
I
know,
think that speaks volumes. It's funny, since you were here last time, I started thinking about your epiphany. Kind of came around one thing, and that was that if it were hallucinations, then why is it always negative? Because people have all kinds of different hallucinations. And I was wondering if you have extrapolated that out into any of the other, like borderline or obsessive compulsive, or because I was wondering, it seems like, none of those are necessarily. I guess you wouldn't go to the doctor if I have this compulsive thing with smiling for people. But I was wondering if you have seen any similarities with any of the other categories.
similarities.
As far as entities opposed to actual mental issues.
Well, people don't understand where thoughts come from. They think they come from your brain. Your brain is like a radio receiver. I mean, it you tune it to the frequency, or it gets tuned to a frequency by trauma or other things that happen in your life. And with trauma, it gets jammed at a low frequency. The more trauma it is, the lower the frequency. But if you took a radio receiver and you took it back 200 years and turned it on, if it played, uh, the people back then would be going, how do people get inside that box? You know, how'd they fit in there? And how can they get a whole orchestra in there and band, all the instruments and all, they'll open it up eventually and they'll look in there and they're not going to see any people. They'll see tubes and transistors and whatever else is in there, but they're not going to see any people. Well, it's the same thing with the brain. The brain is like a radio receiver.
Yes,
it
sir.
receives thoughts. Thoughts do not come from the brain. Nobody has cut open the brain and found a thought.
You're
No.
right. You're right. I was listening to something on a podcast the other day, and the gentleman said something that was so interesting. And I don't know, if he was a doctor or what his background was, but he was saying that 90% of all people have at some point had flashes of violent thoughts. And I know that has happened to me before, or actually while I was pregnant and a little bit when I was in my 20s. I had like this one reoccurring thing. It was like this weird vision, and it would come up. And then it just stopped, it just ended. Is that as common as he says it is?
Yeah. They hit us all. These thoughts do not come from the brain. They come from outside of us. Okay. And if you look at the schizophrenics, it's a constant barrage of negative self-defeating thoughts toward themselves and everybody else around them. Now, we all get hit by those. And psychology and psychiatry never ask where the thoughts come from. That's beyond them. They can't measure it. They can't see it. They can't observe it. It's everybody has thoughts, but nobody asks where they come from. I mean, we're spiritual beings. If your spirit leaves you, you're dead. Your body rots. You're gone. I mean, so we're all energetic beings. And thoughts are energy. Memory's energy. These voices are energy. And they impinge on our energy fields, and that's what causes the disruption. Now, because they are energetic, and like John Mace says, they're of the energetic universe, and in the energetic universe, there is no time, there is no space, there is no matter. Okay, it's a totally different universe than what we're stuck in between. Okay, we're between the energetic universe. We're energetic beings living in physical bodies. And we're kind of connected to the physical through what Mace calls the mind, and the mind isn't what. See, John Mace's therapy works almost like magic, and the fact that it does work shows that he's right about what he's saying. So he's saying that the mind is not what we think of as the mind. He said the mind only takes pictures of where you put your attention. The spirit does the rationalizing, the processing, the all the other stuff that we attribute to the mind. Okay, and psychology and psychiatry ignore the spirit. Just totally ignore it. You can't do that in a spiritual being. So what they're doing is it's like pouring Thorazine on a magnetic field and expecting the magnetic field to disappear. So they can't see. All energy is invisible. You can't see it. So you look at gravity, you can't see it. You can see the effects, you can feel the effects.
Right.
Magnetic field, you can't see it. You would never know it was there unless
Faith,
you had
love,
all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's all energetic. It's all frequency. Like Tesla said, is frequency.
And so what is Mace doing? What type of therapy does he do?
It's not like anything that existed previously. It's what I've been looking for all my life. And I kind of ran into it. I read the books and I applied it in my private practice, and I'm going, this stuff works. I mean, if it works, it's the truth.
Absolutely.
So what John Mace found, and he spent his whole life doing this, you know, and I've been training for about 2 years now under that, and I have a very good understanding of how it operates.
Yeah.
So he sees the mind itself as a stimulus response mechanism.
Hmm.
It wherever you put your attention, it takes pictures of where you're putting your attention. Right? He saw that the spirit was energetic, and he also realized. I mean, this guy was a genius, and he had nothing to do with psychology or psychiatry. So, unlike me, he started with a clean slate. You know, he
Well, and
wasn't.
you were what do they call it? Hazed. You were hazed the other direction or groomed.
I was. I was brainwashed, and it took a long time to get to break that brainwashing. Now,
Hmm.
the only advantage I had is I didn't trust authority, so I
Right.
never fully accepted what they said. But Mace found that energy travels from negative to positive, and it does that in all areas. You know, even in magnets, the electricity, negative to positive. The soul is pure positive. You know, in its native form, it's pure positive.
Sure.
The mind or the spirit, however, or the memory will get infused in during traumas. It it will it will be pre-programmed unconsciously. So if something really bad happens to you, you start searching for what did I do? How did I get into this? What did I do? You know, looking for fault. And because your attention turns on you in a trauma, the decision will be yours. You know, you will make a decision about who you are based on that trauma. And it won't be a good one. And it won't be a real one. It won't be a true one.
Right.
It'll be a destructive one. So it's like the ego, you run into something really, really bad, really emotionally upsetting. You don't want to deal with it. It hurts to even look at it. Your ego takes it and it buries it, but it buries it alive. So it stays there in a live form, and then it takes energy to hold it there. Okay. It wants to get out, but you won't let it. So suppose somebody maltreated you really bad and caused some traumatic incident in your life that really stuck with you. Anytime somebody like that comes up, that incident would be buried, but it's still alive. So anybody who reminds you of that person is going to set that thing off,
Hmm.
and it's going to go off like a landmine, and it's going to cause a reaction, either fight or flight reaction. You know, so it's disrupting your life, and the more of those you have, the more disruptions you're going to have, and the more distant you're going to be from your real self. So the Mace energy system will go in there and discharge those things in record time, like in an hour. I've seen traumas that were, you know, happen when the person was 7 years old, virtually vanish. I mean, they still remember them, but there's no emotional charge to them. You know,
Yeah. I know Joe
so
Dispenza says that the mind doesn't know the difference between what really happened and what you imagine. So if you were to recreate bad things and turn them into good things enough times, the brain might not know the difference, so to speak.
well, it's not the brain, it's the spirit. It's the
Oh, okay.
where the memory sits is the spirit. You
Sure.
know, the
Because
brain
it
is
records everything.
right, right, and it's the only energy source that can do that. I mean, there's no other energy, and it's, you know, it's at the different frequencies between beings. I mean, human beings are probably one of the highest energy sources on this planet.
Right.
You know, and it's the different frequencies of different animals that make them what they are also. So the brain of an ape is about the same size ours is, but their frequency is different. So
Right.
we're talking about uh, frequency. So the brain is like a radio. So it works. It works like nothing else I've ever
So
seen.
can you give us an example, like the 7-year-old, the story that you were talking about, or anything that like someone came in and this is kind of what we do, or is it too complex to explain? And
It'll take a little while. So I remember one gal. I mean, uh, when she was like 3 years old or something like that, um, she she defecated under the bed or something like that because they wouldn't let her into the bathroom. The adults were out there and they wanted her to stay in that room. So she lied about it. And then when they found it, she was totally mortified, you know. So I think it was her grandmother who found that and went off, now just blasted her. So that really traumatized her. So anybody like her grandmother from that time on, including her mother, would set her off.
Right.
Okay. So that negative identity was stored in there. And the more times they go off, the stronger they get until you get to the point where you feel you are that negative identity or you are that subpersonality. You don't even think about it. It's like, oh, yeah, when this kind of person comes around, I just don't want to be there. So it sets off a fight or flight reaction.
Hmm.
So Mace found that the mind can create pictures of not only where you focus your attention, but it can create pictures of feelings. It can create pictures of
Audio
concepts,
concepts.
concepts. And you can, once it does that, then your attention is the link between the spirit and that negative identity, and the spirit will drain it. Yeah. And it will drain down to nothing. So it's not the same as just kind of thinking about it and thinking about it, thinking about it. It's actually finding it. I mean, finding it was the hard part. Mace took years to figure out how to find where these things were buried. And he found that the spirit would show you where it was buried, you know.
Yes.
So it gets into playing with the images at that point.
All right.
But it works. I mean, it works like nothing I've ever seen. I'm having a hard time with schizophrenics with it because they're so distracted. They
Sure.
have a hard time concentrating. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I was going with, the other, like bipolar or, OCD or something. When I think of compulsion, I think more like demonic or satanic or addiction that's beyond our control, that could have a similar identity or signature. And then when I think about you know I guess there's compulsion and there's also like being bound to a virtue, which is different because it's more, you know, it's just more honorable. You're doing it because you're doing it from the inside. Do you see what I'm asking as far as compulsion goes? Do you see where it could possibly be an entity as well?
Well, it was probably be more a negative identity. So the entities, and see, there comes a blur spot there. Like, is it a negative identity or is it a actual entity? And psychiatry has pretty much pathologized everything. Their dictionary of statistical stuff. Um, it's their Bible. So what they've done is they've taken segments of human behavior and they've pathologized them. You
Sure.
know, so they started off with I think 97. When this thing came out, and now it contains virtually what 297, I think it was, and all of these are completely fabricated. Compulsive disorders, bipolar disorder. There's not a single test to test for any of those
I
297
love you
disorders.
saying this. It makes me so happy because I think so many people get put like a
Oh yeah,
curse
they get
put on them.
they right, they do. It's like a curse. Oh, you're bipolar or you're schizophrenic or you're neurotic or you're I mean, these things are all made up by these psychiatrists, two-thirds of which are under the thumb of big pharma.
Right.
So I heard it was like a cattle barn in there. It's a guy comes in. There's a group of them that meet every few years, and they come in. One guy goes, "Hey, I got a new mental disorder. It's this da 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 da." And they all think about it, and the ones from big pharma go, "Well, can we make a medicine that would do something for that?" And then they all vote on it. They voted in. They voted out.
Yeah.
They um, you know, every single one of them are fabricated. There are no blood tests. There are no lab tests. There are no X-rays, EEGs, EKGs, nothing. There's nothing that will verify any of those disorders, including
Right.
schizophrenia. You know, there was one doctor that hit it right on the head, a Dr. Julian Whitaker. He said every single one of these mental illnesses was fabricated, breaking up segments of human behavior and pathologizing them. There are no blood tests, there are no lab tests, no x-rays, EEGs to validate even a single one of these diagnoses. They are classes of behavior that are grouped by psychiatrists and voted to be a mental disorder.
Yeah, it's so funny that you read that because I had pulled Sigmund Freud. It says, did Sigmund Freud define a neurotic as an individual holding thoughts that clash with those held by the prevailing culture? And I was thinking about that as far as, you know, how the spectrum just keeps moving, and like you're saying, the book keeps getting bigger. And so if you wouldn't mind clarifying for me what the difference would be between like a negative identity and a compulsion.
Well, the compulsion could be a negative identity. It's a program in the mind,
Right.
that and compulsions are usually done over and over again to deal with anxiety.
Okay.
They're kind of repetitive behaviors that are not functional.
Okay.
So you kind of go after the anxiety. What is causing the anxiety? And remove that. So the difference between what psychiatry does and what
Mhm.
psychology does is William Wundt got to the point where they were talking about the spirit, arguing about what it was, how it operated, what the mind was, and they weren't getting anywhere. It just went round and round. So he said, well, I'm going to study behavior. So that's where psychology went from the study of the soul to the study of behavior. And that's what they do. And what psychiatrists do is drug behavior.
Yeah.
They don't get to the cause of the mental illness. They have no idea what causes any mental illness, you know, other than what they think. Um, they don't cure anything with these drugs.
Do you know, I mean, are you friends with any psychiatrists as far as like talking to them on a real level? And have you had conversations or questioned or been able to access, you know, their honest opinions on things?
Oh, I know what their honest opinions are. I've been working with them for the last, you know,
And so are they sold in or are they sold
oh, they're
out?
brainwashed. They're totally
Okay.
brainwashed.
Okay.
You know,
So
and this isn't just a facet of. I mean, it started with the back in 1910. It started when the Rothschilds took over the medical system.
right.
So in 1910, they came up with the Flexner Report. Okay, they pushed this through Congress, made it a law. Of course, I bet you dollars to donuts. They paid them off to benefit them, and this was the Rothschilds and the Carnegie Foundation. So the Flexner Report was pushed through Congress in 1910 at the behest of the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefeller Group, which sponsored the infamous Flexner Report. It shut down any medical school that taught any subject outside of mainstream pharmacology. Okay, so here comes Big Pharma taking over the medical system back in 1910.
And the
So,
apothecaries would begin closing.
well, what happened is they knocked out everything else. They knocked out naturopathy. They knocked out the electrical stuff that Tesla was working on. They knocked out Tesla's violet ray. They all these other like acupuncture, all these things, they knocked it out, and it was so powerful that that there was only a handful of medical schools that survived. They
Yeah.
made it so if you didn't teach pharmacology, you couldn't license doctors.
Right.
So it was like a strong arm move where they took over the medical thing at that time, and they also took over the universities. So the
Yes.
universities were teaching what they wanted taught, which was pharmacological medicine, and they're still teaching it. Now when you come to the mind is energetic. What goes wrong with it is energetic. Now they started off blaming the mothers. I mean, when it came to schizophrenia, oh, the mothers did something wrong. They mistreated their baby, or they did da 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 da. I mean, this was back in the 40s and
Blame
50s
it on
kind
the
of thing.
women.
Blame it on the women. But but the women said, "Hey, man, we didn't do anything. I mean, we had normal kids. I mean, what do do? What's the deal?" So they had to back off of that. They had
Right.
to move it somewhere where you couldn't observe what was actually going on. So they
Sure.
took it and they moved it up into the genetics area. There was nothing to it. They had no reason for it. They just, they, you know, psychiatrists on the front line could not now see what was going on. It's genetic. No, the average guy, the average frontline practitioner like me, isn't a geneticist, and neither are psychiatrists and regular doctors and the rest of the establishment. I mean, you got a small body of people who can now disprove what they were saying, and they got away with it for a decade or more. Oh yeah, it's a genetic disorder. But then after a while, some honest geneticists who managed to get their papers published past big pharma and
Yay.
the educational controlled big pharma universities, they come up and they go, "Hey, we're not finding any genetic disorder. There is none." And that blew them out of the water. I mean, there was all this turmoil, and what do you mean there is none? Well, we're not finding any. You show us where it is. We've measured the difference between the genes of schizophrenic people and normal people, and there is no difference. So what are you talking about? Where's this come from? They made it up. They have to look like they know what they're talking about. So they made it up. Nobody could disprove it. And even if that small group, there's even a smaller group that would be interested in disproving something like that. So it took a long time to disprove it. So they needed something else.
Yeah.
So back in the 70s, I think it was Eli Lilly, pharmaceutical company, comes up with, hey, well, when they put out Prozac, they go, well, it seems to work with depressed people, and it's a chemical. So there must be a chemical imbalance that our drug somehow, fixes things a little bit. And they got a label on that thing now, says, hey, may result in suicidal thinking on the label. They made that completely up. It was a total lie. They knew it at the time, and they published it anyway.
Yeah.
You know,
And from a
oh,
business perspective, they raise money for, this new drug, and they actually put into the formula being sued and paying those things out. And they completely disregard the human side of, someone's son or someone's daughter is, committing suicide. It's it's absolutely crazy.
oh no, it's money and control. So um, it was finally they disproved that.
Mhm.
The chemical, and I noticed that when I went to work. I mean, I was brainwashed like the rest of them. You know, by the time by the time I got in, I just didn't trust them. That was the difference.
Yeah.
I wasn't fully buying everything they were telling me. That's what I hated about psychology. You know, here's these books, and they go memorize these books and spit it back to us on a test.
Yeah.
But we never had any access to clinical populations. We never had any access to seeing any of these disorders or these mental illnesses.
So
We
you're just
never had
taking
any.
it on faith.
Yeah, it's like, well, you take it on faith. We're telling you the truth. Well, I'm not so sure. And you look in the back of their book, and here's this guy got this information from this guy who got it from this guy who bought it from this guy who got it from this guy. It looked like intellectual incest. I mean, it was like, it's like if enough of them say the same thing, they think it's the truth. So they quote each other over and over and over. It's nuts what goes on.
Science by
And
consensus.
yeah, and then there was this one organization that did a research test on these articles that psychology was publishing. Now, I
Yeah.
didn't know this at the time. I didn't know it while I was going through school.
Sure.
They found that 80% of what psychology published was non-replicable, which means it was BS. It was worthless. It was garbage. And that's what graduate school does: publish or perish. If they don't publish something, they lose ground. They got to publish a certain amount to advance up into the academic uh, higher echelons. So they publish crap. you know and psychiatry, they publish what big pharma pretty much wants them to publish. you
Yeah.
know and the big pharma controls a lot of these journals too. You will not publish this in our journal, or they won't fund it, or they will pay universities to do research in areas that they want to show, something works. You know, so
Sure.
they have an awful lot of control, and including with this DSM stuff.
Right.
So what they've done with DSM is they've taken labels and they've taken virtually every human emotion and turned it into a mental illness. So a kid who talks back is a mental illness. A man who spends too much time on the internet, a woman who grieves the death of her husband or child more than 2 weeks, are all labeled mentally ill. You know, they're told they needed to be drugged. Unhappiness is labeled
They
depression.
consider somebody that grieves longer than 2 weeks to be
That's right.
mentally ill?
That's what
Wow.
that's their definition of depression.
Wow.
It's nuts.
So I have a
So
question for you. Like, I would imagine, just like any occupation, you have younger people coming up and, saying, hey, what did you like about, what you did? What did you not like about it? Do you recommend doing it? What do you say to people now that are looking into becoming therapists, counselors, psychiatrists?
I tell them to forget that garbage and go take the MACE course in Australia. It's a little pricey, but it does the job. I mean, if you want to be a therapist, you don't want to be going through this garbage that the traditionals are putting you through. You want something that works,
Right,
and that stuff doesn't work. You just listen to the same stuff over and over and over again. Okay, the person feels listened to, you know, but nothing is cured.
right,
In a MACE session in 1 hour, you walk out of there and you're a different person. That
right.
that trauma that's been bothering you for decades is now gone. It's displaced.
Sure.
You know,
I would say that the greatest, because I did do therapy for a little while after my divorce, and I would say the greatest information I got from that therapist was books to read. Other than that, I wouldn't say that she cracked open anything, or offered me any unique advice. It was more of just listening, which is, I can't believe that there's an industry that insurance pays somebody to sit there and listen,
oh yeah, yeah. You got to go through all this training and stuff. And I've been through what 4 years undergraduate and 4 years of graduate school. And I kept thinking, okay, after I got out of undergraduate, I'm like, well, they must be hiding the answers up in the graduate school. They tell
Right,
those guys what's really going on.
right,
So I applied for a master's program in counseling, and it was like, okay, I learned some stuff, Roger's stuff, the reflecting stuff, and kind of, some basic listening skills type stuff, but it didn't get to the cause of anything, you know.
right.
And if you ask these people too many questions, they got pissed at you. And it was even worse in the PhD program. If you, by the time I got to the PhD program, I had spent 7 years at one of the biggest mental hospitals on the planet. I'd already got my master's degree. You know, I'd had a lot of frontline experience, and most of these people were working with the professors either just came up through the academic ranks and had very little frontline experience, or they worked with students in a counseling center or something, something like that. And
You're
and
lucky you didn't go crazy.
well, I kind of did.
Oh,
It,
interesting.
it,
I
it
wanna
was
hear this story. Do
Oh, it was
tell.
like I would start asking them questions, and they didn't like that. They didn't like that at all. And it was like just like they say, piled higher and deeper. I watched these guys. Half of them were backbiting each other. These giant egos were just flashing at each other. And it was like the students, and a lot of cases, like if you could support and help a professor write something, you were favored. But it was almost like they took turns going and beating on each student to see how much crap they could take. And I didn't take a lot of it, so I got in trouble. I
I'm getting
opened my
out of
mouth.
here, and I'm gonna get on my motorcycle and go.
Well, that's kind of what happened, except that there was a clash, you know, and I was getting more and more depressed. I mean, I wasn't learning what I came to
I'm
learn.
so
I,
glad you
I they
survived
they
it.
they didn't know anything. It was like everything was out of books. It was like, and this DSM thing, it was their Bible. You know, they wanted you to memorize this freaking thing. And the students had no idea where it came from or how it was developed or who was behind it at
Right,
all. It's
right.
just like you're being told this is the Bible. These
The
are the
Wizard of Oz
psychiatric
says that
illnesses.
you should
Exactly.
read this book.
Exactly.
Oh, and I'm so how did you end up coping after there was the clash? How did you
I just dropped. I had almost a straight A average, and I can't deal with this anymore. And I think they were glad to see me go. That they could say, well, why don't you take some time off and come in another year? And I'm like, get the hell out of here. You'll
good
never
for
see my
you.
butt. You'll never see my butt again. But they got these 10 psychiatrists in the room for this Bible, and they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars selling these DSMs every year too, as if these are real diagnostic entities. Now they need them to put on the insurance reports.
Mhm.
Oh, it's paranoid schizophrenia 303.10, subaccess, da, 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 da. It looks all official. It looks like they know what they're talking about.
So do you think insurance is in on the game?
Well, insurance is they're part of it, but I don't think they know where these things came from either.
Right.
They'll pay for certain of these illnesses and they won't pay for others,
Mhm.
you know, and they'll pay psychiatrists and they'll pay psychologists, but they won't pay anybody else because they think they know something, you know.
Right.
All
Right.
psychiatrists do is treat physical symptoms. They don't get to the cure of any mental illness whatsoever. They just drug the body, and the spirit and these mental illnesses are energetic,
Mhm.
so it's akin to um, all memory is energetic, thought is energetic, the spirit is energetic. So we're physical bodies with an energy system inside. We're a unit of energy, a spirit, a soul. So it's all energetic, and these people are treating people like
Mhm.
they're machines.
Yeah.
Well, you pour this you pour this kind of oil into the machine, and it'll run better, or you do this and adjust the timing a little bit. And so they're treating us like machines, but we're energy,
Yeah.
which Mace realizes that we're energetic beings, and if you don't fix the energy and the vibration in certain sections, the being isn't going to get better. You know,
So let's say you're like in your second year in your into your master's of, becoming a therapist, and you're watching this. Would you, like, let's assume you really believe it. Would you literally drop out of school and go to Australia and do the mace thing?
well, no, because you have to have the credentials.
Yeah,
I've got the credentials.
right.
But the credentials really don't mean anything other than I jumped through all their hoops. Did
Sure.
I learn anything there? Not much. How much of it do I remember? A small fraction.
Right,
You know,
because it was never applicable.
it was never applicable. You couldn't use it. So when I got into the state hospital, I wasn't prepared for what I was going to deal with there. I mean, it was like La La Land. It was like it was a whole new world. I mean, and I started watching what was going on. None of the staff there were hundreds of staff there. I mean, hundreds. It might have been even thousands. I don't know.
Mhm.
It was huge. It was the size of a small city. Not one of them were interested in what those voices were telling the schizophrenics. Not a single one of them. And you could see that the voices were affecting the schizophrenics. The more they listened to them, the more trouble they got into. You know, the stronger they were, the less functional they were. So there was a one-to-one correspondence between them having the voices and them getting in some kind of trouble or interpersonal squabble or something. And they were always self-sabotaging themselves. So we had a psychiatric rehab center, the Yarborough Center there, and we were trying to give them basic work skills. Okay. So it's not anything real complicated, like basic auto mechanics, janitorial service, hairdressing, basic jobs to get
Mhm.
them out of the hospital so they go to
Sure.
work. But I noticed that with the schizophrenics, as they approached succeeding and graduating, they would do something to sabotage themselves and get thrown out of school or be suspended or do something. It was almost like clockwork. As they got approached succeeding, they would sabotage themselves. And I'm like, why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? And then I'd look around me, and it would be like, well, what are these voices saying? Nobody knew what they were saying, and the schizophrenics certainly weren't telling the psych staff, because if they did, they'd get drugged more,
Right. And they
you
didn't
know,
want to be drugged.
and they didn't want to be drugged. And none of the staff knew what the voices were saying. They all believed they were hallucinations, every single one of them, and then I started asking these guys, what are these voices telling you? Now, it took a while for them to get to trust me, at least a year, maybe 2 years, because if what they found is if they talked to psych about these voices, they ended up being locked down or drugged more. So
Right.
they didn't trust the psychologists and the psychiatrists. So once I got them to trust me, the first pattern I saw was these voices were consistently negative.
Hmm.
You know, and why, if they're a hallucination, why are they running a consistently negative pattern? Hallucinations are random. They're all over the place. They're positive, they're
Right.
negative, they're they're just, they run the whole gamut of they're not just negative.
Right.
These voices are consistently, persistently, predictably negative. What
Right.
holds them on that negative course?
Right.
Nobody's asking that, because they're not asking questions about the voices. You know, the second one I learned was they're anti-religious. I mean, I had patients come and tell me, "Hey, when I repeat the 23rd Psalm, the voices react like worms thrown on a hot frying pan." You know, and so I started asking the other schizophrenics on my caseload, "Hey, when you go to church, how do the voices react? When you repeat the 23rd Psalm, what do they do?" It was consistent. It was the same response among all of them. The voices didn't like churches. They didn't like preachers. They hated the 23rd Psalm. They didn't want anything to do with anything spiritual.
Right.
Why would a hallucination do that?
It
You
makes
know,
no sense.
no, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But these guys have everybody brainwashed that these are hallucinations. And where did that come from? It came from the high priest of psychiatry saying, "We are psychiatrists and we hereby pronounce, without any research,
It's
that the voices are
exactly.
hallucinations because we said so. And you
We
better believe it because we're psychiatrists."
and we have
Oh crap.
credentials. And we have
Yeah,
credentials.
we have the highest credentials. We're the high priest, you
Yeah.
know, and we got the universities to teach you this crap too. So you're getting it from us, you're getting it from the universities, and it's in the books.
And it's being reinforced by, the way the business models are, the way the
Right.
licenses are set up, the way
And
that
what the DSM says,
yeah.
DSM says, oh yeah, schizophrenics, they're the hallucinations. You know, it's
But
bull.
that's what I was talking about, though, with the compulsion or borderline or whatever. None of them are ever positive.
No,
Like any addiction, like people don't. Well, I guess I don't know. Do people have good addictions? I
well, yeah, running,
Yeah, or working out or whatever. But
yeah, that kind of stuff.
and I could see where that could get like to where it would interrupt your life or whatever. But for the most part, a lot of those things
No,
are
addictions,
they're just really
eh,
deeply negative.
right? Addictions imply control. And it's not your control. And the worst I've ever seen was meth. When I was working in the prison, those prisoners would come in. They were there because they went psychotic on meth. So they were stealing stuff to get the meth. And I had these groups while I was in the prison. See, when I was in the state hospital, when the psychiatrist caught me asking questions about what these patients were hearing,
Hmm.
I got called up into their office on the red carpet, and I was told, "You will not ask them questions about their voices. What you're doing is reinforcing the hallucinations and making them worse."
They were
If
gaslighting you.
Well, they were trying to,
Yeah,
and of course you can't talk back to them,
sure.
because they hold the power in the mental health system. They're the the top ape in the mental health system. You don't cross a psychiatrist unless you want trouble.
Right.
So I'm sitting there going, "You're so full of it, your eyes are floating. You don't know what you're talking about, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut until I get out of here, and then I'm going to go somewhere and scream." It's like, so that happened twice. They don't want you asking questions about what the voices are saying. They don't want you investigating it.
So
You know,
glad you did. What you bring out is so amazing. And so is there a piece of you that's still mad about it?
Yeah, I'm upset at it.
Yeah,
I'm upset because what they're doing, they're gaslighting the people.
everyone.
You know, they're gaslighting of the whole Western world.
Yeah.
And probably the whole planet. And big pharma is backing them to the hilt. Big pharma is they're behind this DSM.
Mhm.
So these psychiatrists make up these mental illness, and then big pharma comes behind there with some kind of drug to treat it.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
always say Satan's favorite way to kill humans is poison.
well, you
It
look at
seems like it's across the board.
you look at these antipsychotic drugs that they're giving these people. Okay, they say, oh yeah, they're safe. They're safe. They're some of the most dangerous drugs used in medicine today. And they won't tell these people. I never saw a psychiatrist tell a patient how dangerous these drugs actually
Informed
could be.
consent. Yeah.
They'll tell them that
Have you seen pharmacists tell them?
no.
Okay.
Yeah,
'Cause
but I,
that's
I
what happened
didn't
to
work.
me.
I didn't work around a lot of pharmacists. Those drugs were already there when I got there.
Okay.
So the patients didn't have any access to the pharmacist. I didn't. The drugs were already there. They're already in the hospital. They bring them
Right.
in by the truckload.
Well, and how many times have we been like in the line at Walgreens or wherever, pharmacy in the middle of nowhere, whatever it is, there's people there, they're picking up stuff. I have personally never seen a pharmacist say, hey, be careful with this one or whatever. Now, I have had that experience though, because I had a friend who was a pharmacist and I would, of course, be a patron at his place. And he was like, Carmen, this Xanax is, really bad. I know your mom just died, but be careful. And I was off of it in 2 weeks because it scared me,
Yeah,
and I wouldn't have been afraid had he not said that.
yeah. So some of them are good. I mean, some of the psychiatry. But what I saw at the state hospital and what I see a lot of times in the mental health centers is these drugs. What they do is with long-term use, they actually rot out your brain and peripheral nervous system.
Yeah,
Now,
I've
I've seen a
seen
lot
those.
in the state hospital. They call it the Thorazine shuffle. These guys could not walk with a normal gait. They kind of shuffled their feet. So what happened was during autopsies, with especially with the state hospital people, they noticed that the schizophrenics who've been on these antipsychotic drugs, the phenothiazines, for a long time, their brains were shrunk like walnuts.
Yes. I've
You know?
seen those video or those, Dr. Amen has a lot of those brain
Yeah,
scans, and it's amazing, the difference between even an older person's drug and someone that has been on, some psychiatric drugs. Do you have a hierarchy of the ones that you think are the most dangerous?
well, virtually all the antipsychotic drugs are dangerous. You know, lithium it has to be watched very closely because if you sweat out a lot of water from your body, your lithium level increases and it could kill you.
Wow.
I mean, and again, none of these drugs cure anything. But back in my day, it was Thorazine and Stelazine and Mellaril, and Thorazine's a very rough drug. So what the pharmaceutical industry has done is they've made drugs that weren't as awful.
Right.
They didn't have
Calmed them
the
down a
the
little.
horrible side effects. Uh, they're still bad, but not
Right.
as bad as the older ones.
Right. It's like
So
birth control when it first came out. It was horrible. It was so
yeah.
strong.
So what these guys who were doing the autopsies, they started writing papers as like, hey, there looks like there's a one-to-one correlation between these people who've been taking these antipsychotic drugs for a long time and their brains having shrunk to the size of walnuts.
Wow.
It's like so they started putting papers out. Like, hey, we suspect something's going on here. Of course, big pharma didn't like that, and the psychiatric mafia went nuts. No, it's not our drugs. It's the schizophrenia that's doing it. You gotta believe us. It's the schizophrenia. You know, and what these researchers did is they started feeding these antipsychotic drugs to mice and rats and monkeys, and they got the same effect. It was rotting out their brains. It was rotting out their peripheral nervous system. It was doing permanent physiological damage with long enough usage.
Yeah.
And what I saw in the state hospital is when they started showing these symptoms of akathisia and the shaking, where they couldn't stop shaking,
Mhm.
they would give them cogentin to mask that feeling, the shakes, to tamp that down, and then they would continue giving them the antipsychotic drugs, which was destroying their brains more.
It's
So
so
these drugs
sad.
are they're some of the most dangerous drugs in use in medicine today, and they're handing them out by the truckload. I mean, what they're doing, they got a ton of kids on them right now. I mean,
Wow, I'd love to hear those stats if you have them.
I have them somewhere. I just need
Yeah,
to
no
find them.
hurry, no hurry. The other thing that I was wondering about was the MACE system. Is it expensive?
Yeah, they want about $5,000 to go through their training.
Okay. But that it sounds like a really, I mean, to me, if I
But,
was a
but for
therapist or
something
somebody,
that works,
yeah,
for something that actually works.
yes.
Yeah, here's the drugging thing here. Um,
Do share.
you know
Take your time.
this is it's all about control and money.
Sure.
It's psychiatry wants the control. I remember this one psychiatrist getting up before the UN in 1947 and saying, "Yeah, we have to go after the educational institutions. We have to. The churches are easy to overtake. Uh, we, and we have to go after the government." So here's this guy laying out what has already happened.
Yeah.
You know, psychiatry has pretty much taken over, and in Britain it's even worse. I mean, they will section people politically a lot of the time. Well, we don't like what you're saying. You're going in. So uh, global antipsychotic sales have soared to $14.54 billion in 2021, and they're more than that now.
Just the psychotic.
This is just the antipsychotic,
Oh,
$14.54 billion. And these drugs are toxic. They are doing physiological damage with long enough use.
is that global or is that US?
Global.
Okay. And
Okay.
so I guess if you were to divide that out, it would be interesting to know, there's so many people and this percentage of people get this and this percentage of people take it. How many of those pills are people taking on an average in a year
Oh,
or whatever,
dump trucks loads. The antidepressants are going to soar to 15.5 billion. That was in 2022. Okay, and
Man.
they cure nothing. They don't cure what bothering you. They just treat body symptoms. So and then you turn on your TV and you get drug commercial after drug commercial after drug commercial. Big pharma, programming your brain. Now you're not going to go into a psychiatrist's office and complain about anything and not come out with a drug, because that's what they do. You know,
Sure.
they drug the symptoms. You know, so we have a whole society they're brainwashed to think these drugs actually do something about mental illness. You know, and you look at
So
you
when
look at
you
the cost. The cost for a person in the United States to say sane, say he's a schizophrenic, is $800 to $1,000 a month. Okay, that's for office visits and drugs, mostly for drugs. You go across the border to Mexico, 60 miles south of here, and you can get these same drugs
Mhm.
that are sold here in the U.S., made by the same companies with a Spanish label on them,
Yeah.
for $75 for a month's worth, and they're still making a profit off of that.
And you get a trip to Cabo.
Well, you don't have to go to Cabo; you just go to one of the pharmacies across the border. You know,
Hey, if you're
so
gonna go, you might as well have
yeah,
fun
go
too,
there.
Jerry.
And,
Um,
and then the psychiatrist, you go to the psychiatrist there once, he diagnoses you with something. He says, okay, what we usually use to treat this with is this type drug. You go to the pharmacy and you go and buy it. 75 bucks.
right,
Yeah. And then you don't have to go back. You just go back to the pharmacy as long as it's working, and you just keep buying it over and over again.
right, right.
The US tried to get Mexico not to sell some of these drugs over the counter. But Mexico, they do it anyway because they want to make the sale.
Sure.
Now,
It's tourism.
yeah, well, they have drug tourism there.
Yeah.
So these people, they have no conscience. I mean, look what they're doing to the kids. You know, it's estimated more than 7.2 million kids are on psychiatric drugs, and that was as of a few years ago.
And what do they
Yeah.
say? Like, what do they define as a child? Is it under 18 or
Well, I got a breakdown here.
Okay.
They say as of 2017, this is a long time ago, and
Sure.
it's much higher right
Ramped
now. I
up.
guarantee you.
Oh, I
Over a
agree.
million children in the U.S. under the age of 6
Oh
were
my
on
god.
psychiatric drugs. Okay, 622,723. Now this is as of 2017. Are under the age of 5. 80,235 are on amphetamines or ADHD drugs, and you know they do work for ADHD. I mean, they do work. But what I've seen is when I went to the prison, a lot of those guys started off on drugs for ADHD, and then they wanted to keep going.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and then they moved up to meth. And once you get there, I've never seen any drug turn people psychotic as fast as meth did.
Yeah.
I mean, there
I
was
So
more
I have
people
a
went
question
psychotic
about
on.
meth going back to I wanted to like make sure I finished out that complete thought about would you would you go to school now? And you're saying yes because of credentials. What advice would you have to somebody who is working just with schizophrenics right now? They just started. What would you share with them?
Well, I'd share the same thing. I'm not having as much. Uh, I'd say maybe 60% of the schizophrenics I work with that aren't too far gone. I mean, there's different levels, and there's some that are just too far gone to be reached. And I get these letters from frantic mothers all the time. You gotta help me. The person needs to want help. I mean, there 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 have been a number of them who've completely recovered from schizophrenia. It does happen, and
Mhm.
and the ones who haven't completely recovered are much better. You know, and so you have this blend in there from negative identities, but virtually all schizophrenics have suffered some kind of trauma. I mean, it's almost 100%. You know, so you go after this. There's things you can do to weaken the voices.
Mhm.
Okay, uh, you can have them do that, but they're the ones that have to do it. If they don't do it, and if they don't do it every time the voices show up, they're going to start losing ground. So
Right.
it takes work. It takes a lot of work. It can
Right.
be done. And then we can also remove those negative identities at the same time. And they'll come out of the process a whole lot better, even if they don't fully recover, you
Right.
know. And then it's a matter of control, because these voices are going after the control of the person. They want full control, and they're relentless. They will not give up, you know. So yeah, I'd advise them to at least get to the master's degree, because you're not going to find a decent job, maybe a psych tech or something like that, with
Right.
only a BA. You got to get up to, at least to the master's degree, to access a clinical population where you can actually work with them.
Sure.
You know, and PhD. I mean, I know there were PhDs who were working at my level because they couldn't find a job anywhere else. You know, and PhDs usually go up and do administration.
Right.
But if you want to work with a clinical population, you you got to have the credentials.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now a normal population, uh, if you set up a practice and people get to see that this system works and it spreads by word of mouth, you don't need their credentials. I dropped my license a long time ago because I knew they'd come after me. Sooner or
Right.
later, they'd come after me and they go, "Oh, he did this," like YouTube did. You
Mhm.
know, well, he did this, and then we took his license. So I just dropped it, so they can't take it. Now, if
Yeah,
they
you're
come
in
after me,
YouTube jail right now, aren't you?
yeah, I'm in YouTube jail right now. I've also been banned
You're so
by
naughty.
Facebook. Also,
How dare you help
has
people?
thrown me off. So both of those, and if they came after me for using meth right now and said, "Well, you're not licensed by our thing," I said, "Your thing's a bunch of crap. It doesn't work. This is nowhere. You're not even in the same ballpark with what I'm doing now, buddy. Get out of here." You know.
I love it. And so when you talk about your practice, I know you're retired and you don't have like this crazy full book, but are you working with every type of like mental issue, if you want to call it that, since you and I don't believe in the DSM-R, whatever it's called. Um, Or are you mostly sticking with that category of the schizophrenics?
Well, I work with virtually everything, and it's like it's much easier to work to not work with schizophrenics. They're so much harder to deal with. It takes so much more effort. But normal people, it's like a breeze. It's like it's like smooth sailing.
Yay.
It just boom, 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 boom. But because of these shows and because of the book I wrote and what I discovered about the schizophrenic voices, I get a lot of people are schizophrenic, but
Right.
they have to be able to work to free themselves. I mean, we can give them the tools, but they have to use them. We can give them the weapons to fight back, but if they don't fight back, and they just do it sometimes, like some of them do, no, it's progressive. These things will not let up. The voices will keep on them, keep on 'em, take more and more control over them until they're completely gone,
It's
and there's
gotta be
nothing you can do.
so
And then
irritating.
then all you can do is drug them. That's all that's left, you know. But these drugs for schizophrenics who are mild to moderate should not be used for long periods of time.
Right. Just
They
get
should be
them.
used, yeah, because I mean, I'm not saying they're not necessary because I'm able to reach people on these drugs because basically what they are is major tranquilizers. They
Mm,
calm them down. The
right.
voices don't want them calm. They want them upset. They want them agitated. They want them flaring and crazy. And they're actually parasites. They actually drain their energy from them. So
Sure.
that they're very low frequency beings, you know, and they have various degrees of intelligence. Some of them are smart, some of them are stupid, but they're all parasitic.
Yeah. Yeah.
They all drain the person. And
And
there's a
so you do
one-to-one
still work with
correspondence.
the schizophrenics, and, when you work with them, do you do the MACE with them as well?
Yes,
Okay.
if they can concentrate well enough to do it.
Sure.
Now I've had a few that they can't. They just can't concentrate well enough to get through it. So
Right.
then we got to go to first gear, and then it's the medicine and is these basic tools that they can use to fight back against the voices.
Sure.
All right. Then if they succeed at that, the voices will start getting weaker and weaker with time. So basically what those tools do is they starve the voices out. They forbid them or start draining their food source,
Yeah.
you know. And basically that's what the drugs do too, because these drugs calm the patient down, and the voices need them upset. They need them angry. They need them flaming. They need them paranoid. They need them anxious to generate that energy. They can't generate that emotional energy themselves. So
Right.
we're actually being fed on by these things, and not just the schizophrenics. We're all getting hit by them.
Yeah,
You
that's
know.
what I was just gonna ask. I was gonna say, "Hey, can we go through each kind of" we'll call them what they call them, but what advice would you have for somebody that is bipolar or married to somebody that's bipolar? I mean, is this something that you guys are fixing in, 1 or 2 sessions? What's really going on out there right now?
Well, what's going on there right now is the establishment is totally ignoring the Mace energy method. Their status quo. This is something that's going to have to come up from the bottom and work its way up. It's not
I
going to
think
come
it
from the
will.
top down because
Oh,
they're hanging on to their jobs, they're hanging on to their money, they're hanging on to their control. They could care less about something that actually works. Matter
yeah.
of fact, the organization in Australia went to one of their universities and showed them how well this worked, and they said, "Well, we'll adopt it, and if you give us the patent." You know, of course, the Mace organization went,
Right.
up yours.
Yeah.
We're not going to give you the patent. They probably would have set it on the shelf and just, gotten rid of it anyway, like they
Yes.
they did with free energy and cancer cures and all that other stuff. You
Amen.
know, so then they went to the legislature and they showed the Australian legislature, look, this works. It should be adopted in the mental health centers. It should be adopted in the schools and the school counseling programs. It should be taught in the universities, you know. And they showed them it worked, and they just ignored it. And that's what they're doing. They're ignoring it.
Is it simplistic enough that children could learn it?
Well, children can be helped by it.
Okay.
but I don't think it's simplistic enough where a child could actually become a therapist.
Well, no, I don't mean a therapist, but I just meant like if there were tools that they could have or learn in school or things like that. But they would have to be guided.
They would have to be guided.
Got it.
Yeah, yeah, and but it works fast, and it actually works. So
So
if it
borderline, have
works,
you had have you had a success with borderline? How long did it take? Were
you
they
know,
were they were like low level? Were they extreme? Were they young? Were they old?
I don't think I've had any borderlines uh, come to me, but it
Come
would
through yet?
work with them.
Yeah.
I may have. Um,
What
and,
about
and, and
anxiety,
oh,
depression?
anxiety, depression is easy sneezy. It's the psychotics that are difficult.
Okay.
They're the most difficult. They take the most time, and are, it's like once it gets to a certain point, so you got the negative identities, they're there. I mean, they're there anyway. But then you have the psychosis on top of that, and it
Sure.
moves into a whole different world. It moves into, I mean, these things are entities now.
Sure.
These voices they're hearing, they're not hallucinations. They're entities. You can carry on conversations with them. They're
Through
nasty.
through them.
You could talk direct. I've talked
It's
directly
almost
to
like
them.
they're negative channeling.
Well, they're like thoughts. So thoughts are energy. Your thoughts are energy.
Absolutely.
You can communicate directly to them if they'll talk to you. I have. I've talked to them a number of times, and there's people now who are spirit releasers. There's only about 150 of them that I know of right now, but they are actually releasing these things. But they don't get to the negative identities. They will actually get rid of the voices though. So once the voices are gone, the schizophrenia is gone.
Right.
That's what powers the schizophrenia. The voices.
Right.
It's not any chemical imbalance. It's not any genetic anything. These people, they made that completely up. It's just a lie they perpetuated on the entire population of the planet.
So you get the voice or the entity out, and then you said you have the negative identities left, but that's something that you know how to do and you know how to work through with people.
Yeah, yeah. Um, what was I going to say? I had something on the tip of my tongue.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Something about the negative identities.
oh, it's about speaking to them. Not if you can talk them into the light. Like there's different levels of these things, so you get into a whole different world here. Like when I started investigating the voices and what they were doing and how they acted and what they were saying. So I had this group in the prison that we had an agreement that you tell me what the voices are telling you in real time when we're in the therapy session, and I'll do everything I can to help you. You know, and that worked out pretty well. I mean, um, now they became trust issues because they generally didn't trust psych and um,
I don't blame them.
psychiatry. So it got a little touchy at times. Where a psychotic prisoner who had a history of violence would come in and go, "This guard disrespected me. I feel like sticking a knife in his gut." So you had to be real careful there because if that guy actually did that and the administration found out about it and found out that I knew that this guy had said that,
Right.
I'm done. I would have been out of there. So I increased the amount of time I spent with that guy until he calmed down. You know, and it probably saved more guards than it did anything else.
He
You know,
protected the guards
in
because they
in the long
trusted
run.
you. And so did you find that they had supernatural abilities? Like, could any
Yes.
of them ever, like, tell you what the lottery numbers were gonna be or,
Well, I did
um
have one offer me a lottery number. One of their voices actually offered me a lottery number. I didn't take it because I
Right.
didn't trust them.
Right, I
Because
wouldn't either.
even if I won it would be a downhill path because these things were very dark.
Yeah.
I didn't trust anything
Yeah.
that they would have given me.
No.
But I always often wondered what would have happened if I took that
I
lottery
wonder
number.
if you could ask one of them how to heal or get rid of them. I wonder if they would tell you.
Well, no, they don't want you to even know they exist.
Yeah.
You know,
So they try not to show.
Because the way they come across as your own thoughts, and they 90% of the time they sound like the thousands of thoughts that run through your head on a normal
Sure.
day. You know, you can't. They It's like a tiger that blends in with the jungle. You
Mhm.
know, they're in there, and every once in a while they pop out and they jump something. You know, so that's what's so sneaky about them, and they hit us all. So for an example, I mean, a year or so ago, here in Arizona, we don't have lawns for the most part. We go
Right.
out with a machete and we cut cactus or dig them up or something like to keep the grounds clear. So I was out in the back cutting cactus, and I have this beautiful white husky
Aw.
female.
In Arizona?
Yeah, she doesn't belong here. She believe me. She got dumped on me.
Okay.
So, we kind of adopted her, and she's out there running around in the desert. And she runs by me, and I'm cutting them with the machete, and all of a sudden I hear this voice boom through my head, "Cut her head off," and I'm
Oh,
like, "What?" You know, and I'm shocked. I mean, that wasn't my thought,
yeah.
but even the thought of it shocked me. You know,
Right.
so they were feeding off of that shock. And I knew what it was right at that moment, but it still shocked me. And I don't know how many people I've heard say, "Well, I was standing on a bridge and I had a thought to jump," or I was on the edge of the Grand Canyon and I had a thought to jump. Over and over again. These thoughts are thoughts that normal people would never act upon,
Sure.
but these entities put them into your head.
They're in the
And
airwaves.
they're in the airwaves, so they throw them in there, and everybody believes that you're taught from the time you're a kid that every thought that comes into your head belongs to you. That's far from true.
And see, that would be one of those things that we could teach kids at school, because if a kid was aware of that and they tested it, is it true? Like, no, it's not true. I don't really want to do that. That wouldn't be a smart thing to do. That's not my thought. Let it go.
Yeah,
Um,
well, they wouldn't do that because they're keeping it secular. They don't want to get into the spiritual energy at all, even though we're spiritual beings. I mean, we're spiritual beings. These thoughts that we have they're coming from other spiritual beings.
yeah,
The
that
good
was a
ones
big
come from.
reason that I homeschooled. Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah.
I agree.
So just to know that not all the thoughts that come through your head are yours. Manuel Swedenborg wrote about that 300 years ago. He
Mhm.
wrote Heaven and Hell, and he talked about these negative spirits, and that's what first keyed us on to what was going on here. There was a clinical psychologist named Wilson Van Dusen who worked at a state hospital in California, and
Mhm.
he wrote a book, The Presence of Other Worlds, and he talked about the voices that his schizophrenic patients were hearing matched exactly what Emanuel Swedenborg said that the evil spirits in hell were saying to him.
Wow.
There was a one-to-one correspondence.
Is he the one that would actually do like surgery and stuff, like through going through, like he would get into a
No,
hypnotic state? Okay, so that's a
no,
different one.
but
Okay.
he was like uh, one of the foremost scientists of his day. He was a mining engineer for the Queen of Sweden. He made a lot of money for her. He studied uh, medicine. I mean, he studied everything. He was very well schooled. And then at the age of 50, he got this voice told him, "Okay, drop all that stuff now. Now you're going to go into spiritual studies." And
That's my favorite.
yeah, he was given access to heaven and hell, free access, and he would go into a trance and he'd be gone for 3 days at a time, and he would
Oh
come
yeah,
back and
that
he
is
would
him.
yeah
That
he
is
would
the
wri-
guy.
he would write about it.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know if he ever was a
So he
surgeon.
he would come back and have it, not surgery, but he would tell people what they should do to fix what was wrong with
Oh
them.
no, you're talking about Edgar Casey, I think.
Oh, you're right. It is Edgar Casey.
Yeah, Edgar Casey did that. So Swedenborg talked about these, and Van Dusen and I both saw, after I started studying Swedenborg, that yeah, there's a one-to-one correspondence between what Swedenborg is calling evil spirits and these voices that these people are hearing. Now, they run more than one pattern. So that's one of the first things that I saw. The first two I saw when I was in the oh well, first of all, before I forget this, there are 389,558 No, that's anti-anxiety drugs. On anti-anxiety drugs, these are kids, and 38,143 on brain-damaging antipsychotic drugs. So these people don't care. They're
Well,
prescribing
and
these
I
things
can't
to
imagine
everybody.
the parents know, like you were saying. I mean, there's no
No, they
way.
trust these guys. They
Yeah,
trust them. They don't know what's going on here. And these guys, they're certified. They had these big diplomas. People trust them. Hopefully, they don't trust them too much more after this pandemic stuff.
yeah, yeah.
They ought to be a little more cautious now. But the first things I noticed when I started questioning schizophrenics as to what these voices were telling them was the consistent negativity.
Hmm.
First pattern. Second pattern was anti-religious. Why would a hallucination be anti-religious
But with everyone, it would
with
be. It would
with
make sense
everybody?
if it was once in a while, but with everyone.
Now, other patterns that appeared over the years. Now, what's happening here is, okay, you think about a big magnet with a magnetic field. Okay, you can't see, you can't hear, you can't smell that magnetic field. The only way you know it's there is by the effect it has on physical reality.
Sure.
So, you try to convince somebody that you go back 100 years and try to convince them that this thing has a magnetic field. You can't unless you get a piece of iron or metal and put it on there. So if you
Right.
get iron filings and you put a jar of iron filings on that magnet, you will see the outline of the magnetic field.
Yes, you will.
Okay, because that magnetic field is energy. These entities are energy. Okay, you can't see them. The normal person can't see them. They can't hear them. They can't feel them. For all practical purposes, they don't exist. Okay, they manifest their reaction in the physical world through these patterns. So these patterns that I'm about to read to you are the same thing as putting iron filings in a jar on top of a magnet. These are the physical manifestations of these voices. Now, psychiatry knows nothing about this because they haven't studied the patterns. They still believe, and psychology too, they still believe that they are hallucinations. These aren't hidden like, this isn't hidden in genetics. This isn't hidden in biochemically stuff. Anybody who works with schizophrenics can see these patterns. And
Right.
if they're running patterns, they're not hallucinations, right? Hallucinations don't run
They're
patterns.
random. Yeah.
Okay. So negativity, anti-religious, they foster and create negative emotion. That's why they're always telling schizophrenics rotten stuff about themselves and everybody else. They want to tune down that vibration to a very low level because that's what they feed off of. And you talk to schizophrenics and ask them, how do you feel after the voices leave? They're completely drained. And there's a one-to-one correspondence with them feeling drained and the voices coming. I've questioned hundreds of schizophrenics. How do you feel after the voices come? How do you feel before they come? How do you feel after they come? Matter of fact, I did a research thing on it, and it turned out to be statistically significant. I did a 1 to 10, kind of subjective thing. How do you feel before the voices come? 1 to 10. How do you feel after they come? 1 to 10. And then we did an analysis of variance on it and was statistically significant. There is an energy change. They feel drained after the voices come. So
Yeah.
these voices have to they do the negativity. They you're no good, you're rotten, you're stupid, you're ugly. All this stuff to generate that negative emotion, which is what they feel off of. They feed off of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Psalm
just
23.
Yeah, and it was
They hate
interesting too
Psalm
because
23.
I love Dr. Andrew Kaufman. He was originally trained as an engineer, and then he went to medical school, and he said exactly what you said. He said they are taught in medical school to regurgitate and to
Yep.
memorize. And he goes, but when I went to engineering, I had to solve problems. We were allowed to bring as many books as we wanted. And I've shared this story before, but I just love him. And he was also 100% from the top. He saw through all of the pandemic stuff.
Yep.
So,
Yep. He's a friend of mine. So we've
oh,
talked.
that was my next question.
Yeah, we've talked a few times.
He is such a
So
cool guy. I'm friends with him on Facebook, but I don't know him. Very cool.
yeah. So these things energetically drain their victims. Anybody who works with schizophrenics or has one in the house, they'll tell you after the voices hit, they're drained. Or if the voices stay all the time, they're constantly drained.
And not just them, but the people in the house.
And the people in the house too. They're feeding on everybody. So they want to upset the people in the house. So they're throwing off their energy levels also.
It's like
You
a
know,
ghost inside of a person instead of inside of like a haunted house.
yeah, it is. They move into the energetic being of the person. So that their energy.
Has anyone ever done any thermal studies? Like, you know how you can see people's energetic impressions on certain cameras that are very sensitive to heat, where, other people call it an aura, but it's like your tornado field. And there's cameras that can tell. And I'm wondering if anyone's ever done anything like that with
Not
schizophrenic.
that I know of. Now I know one gal who she's an RN. Hopefully I'll have her on an interview sooner or later. Um, well, matter of fact, she's already done a few interviews with me. She could see these things. She did a internship on a psych ward, and
She
she
was
could
the
actually
one on. She was the one on JCK's show. No.
maybe
Okay.
I
I
don't
was
know.
thinking, but I've seen you on a couple shows, so I might have seen it on a different one.
Yeah, I don't remember. She's been on like I think two or three right now with me, but she's actually seen these things. So and I have one gal who she's a like a ghost hunter lady,
Hmm.
and she has recorded what they sounded like. So she's got a recording of the voices talking from a schizophrenic. So I hope to have do some videos with her when she gets back. Okay. So these voices run these patterns. They get louder after sunset consistently.
Oh, interesting. That's kind of like most people that say that they have some sort of drug addiction or alcohol. It gets worse at night, kind of thing. That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's consistent. They get louder if ignored. So I've seen psychiatry a bunch of times tell these patients, "Oh, it's just a hallucination. Just ignore them." And I remember the first time in the state hospital when I saw a psychiatrist do that, I called that guy in a week later and I said, "Well, how's that working for you?" He said, "It ain't working at all. They got worse when I tried to ignore them." And that's consistent. What you resist persists. You
Yes.
start resisting these things, they get stronger, they dig in. There's other ways to handle them. You know, they foster self-destructive behavior. They want the person to shoot themselves in the foot because they're after that negative energy. So anything they can do to cause negative energy, they'll do it. They foster isolation. They don't want the person to have any friends. They don't want them to have any family. They want them to lock themselves in their room and listen to the voices all day long. That's the worst thing that parents of schizophrenics could allow to happen. They need to be occupied with something productive. You
Hmm.
know, watching spiritual videos or watching something neutral. If you allow them to lock themselves in the room, they're listening to the voices all day long, and the voices are getting stronger and stronger. And they're draining them the whole time. They demand the attention of the victims. They won't be ignored. You know, they maneuver for increased control all the time. They're steadily battling for more and more control over the person and their behavior. They gaslight the person. So I had,
So they're very much like a narcissist.
well, they're the ultimate narcissist. So there was one guy, where they convinced him that he had murdered somebody, and he was so whacked out he didn't know whether he did or not. So he was in like a catch-22. They'd gaslighted him there. If he went and told the police, "Hey, I murdered somebody," they'd say, "Well, where's the body?" And he wouldn't know. And they eventually find out he was nuts and take him and lock him up. Uh, on the other hand, if he did murder somebody, they'd lock him up too. So he was like in this catch-22. And every time he heard a police car, he'd start, "Oh, they're looking for me. They're looking for me." So, some of them are pretty smart that way. They manipulate perception. They will get you to perceive any situation around you in the worst possible manner,
Hmm.
and that's what a lot of these delusional disorders are. You can't. The person believes that somebody's following them, and it's very hard to believe. To break that. Uh, this one's really strange, but it's true. They have the complete access to the schizophrenic's memory, because the memory is energetic. They're energetic. They can access the person's memory, and they can pull up every rotten thing he's ever done, and they can rub it in his face until they generate that negative emotional energy. They
Wow.
go, "Hey, you remember when you did this rotten thing to this guy? You remember when you stole this thing to this guy? You remember when you did this that you felt guilty about?" They will bring these things up. There's one guy, he stole a dime like 20 years ago, and they brought that up. So they go in and they pull up stuff that the person themselves has actually forgotten.
Right.
You know?
Wow, that says a lot right there. And that also is very narcissistic, where like you're having a debate with somebody that's narcissistic and they're flipping it around. They're telling you something that you did, 12 years ago that was bad and they've never forgotten it.
Yeah.
It has a lot of similar signatures. But you're right, it's like the ultimate one.
Well, yeah, this is, and if you look at these things, I mean, this is the same gaslighting that the mainstream media has been giving us
Absolutely.
for years. I mean, you look at this negativity,
Yep.
anti-religious,
Check.
negative emotion, energy drain. You can't ignore them. You turn on the TV and they're there. Fostering self-destructive behavior. Um, isolation. Look at what they did during the COVID thing. Yeah, 6 feet away. Don't talk to anybody. Don't visit your relatives. Don't go for Thanksgiving dinner. They demand the attent. I mean, you turn on the television and it's drug, and negative crap and what these scumbags are doing.
Hmm.
Maneuver for increased control. That's exactly what they're doing now. They want to control the whole human race. Gaslighting constantly, manipulating perception. It's all the same thing. It's the same entity on a macroscopic level.
Yep.
You know.
Yep, I agree. And so does it ever scare you, like, when you had the voice happen while you were cutting the cactuses? Because I still meditate, but I used to meditate a lot more and just different. Now I focus more on the Bible verses and things, and I've had tons of friends go, "Oh, I meditate too. Do you ever hear songs or do you ever hear things?" And I once in a blue moon might hear some faint thing, and it didn't scare me, but I am curious if that's something that also is kind of normative, like the visions, like with people having the 90% of the people have visions that are violent every once in a while.
Well, that comes from them too. So Sherry Sweeney, the co-author of my book, or our book, uh, she said that every negative voice you hear in your head against somebody else or yourself belongs to them.
Yeah.
It doesn't come from you.
And
Matter of
then
fact,
and then
Swedenborg
do you
says
think
none of the
about the
Swedenborg,
Bible? Sorry.
yeah, Swedenborg says none of your thoughts come from you. They either come from positive beings or negative beings.
Yeah, I kind of look at it like, to me, I've always thought of like, I really do believe that God is one thing and God is omnipresent. And so I
Hmm.
think of it as, he's everywhere. And so whatever is what we've all thought, or, somebody came to it's kind of like back in the day before we had internet. Somebody would invent something in England and somebody would invent something in the States, and they
Yeah,
would do it around the same time. And
right.
there's no way that they could have known that. It was just it's in
It's
the
in the
one. It's in
Yep,
the
yep.
one.
It's on the one. It's in
and
the
and
air.
and it does make me think of the Bible where they say, "I am Legion." And so have you also ever seen anyone trying to use like exorcism or deliverance or things like that on schizophrenics?
Yeah,
And was
yeah.
that
I've
successful?
heard it. Sometimes it was, and sometimes it wasn't. The
Okay,
the thing the thing is if they don't change their vibrational frequency,
it comes right back.
it comes right back because they'll attract it right back. They might throw those things out, um, and a lot of it. That's what's so good about mace. A lot of it results from trauma. unprocessed trauma
Yeah.
that's stuck in there,
Yes.
And I remember the first time I saw The Exorcist, I was working at the psych hospital then, the big one.
You're
And
brave. I would not have gone to that. I've
oh,
never seen it.
I went there and I was so upset, because it matched so closely what I was seeing with the schizophrenics that I missed my turnoff from Atlanta. I went up another exit before I realized where I was.
Because you were just
I was just so, you
lost in
know,
your thoughts.
it was like boom. I mean, it
How
was
much
like,
further past that? I mean, you went several years past that when that movie came out, until you actually had the true realization.
well, what happened was at the prison when I started. I mean, there's like 23 of these patterns. Okay, and in the prison with the guys that I had, they left me pretty much alone, to do what I wanted except for their paperwork stuff. And I was working with these guys, and sometimes I'd spend 3 4 hours with them where the normal psych person would spend 20 minutes, and they'd go, okay, I had enough. This guy makes no sense to me. I can't get through to him. It's no use talking to him. I was fascinated with the voices and what they were saying. And eventually I got to the point like, I wonder what would happen if I started throwing some monkey wrenches in these patterns that they're running.
Right.
You know? So I started doing that and asking these guys, okay, try this and see what happens. And I come back to me next week and tell me what the response that the voices had to that. So after we found enough different wrenches to throw into the mix, they started coming back and going, the voices don't like what you're doing. They don't want me coming here anymore. They don't like it. And it was one after the other coming in. Hey, the voices don't like what you're doing. And I went, what tough crap, tell them to go stick their heads in the toilet. And then one guy, as he was leaving the office one day, he turns around and he stares at me and he goes, you know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you? And it took me back. I was like, I never thought about it. I didn't think it was. I thought, oh yeah, well, these things are stuck in their head. They can't come out of there.
Like you were
You
just
know,
curious.
I was just curious, and it was like, it got my attention, but that's about it. It
But it
didn't
might have
stop
been
me.
trying to scare you too.
Well, I think that was a warning,
Hmm.
but it wasn't enough of one. So I continued, and then uh, the same guy, I think it was the same guy, came back a few weeks later, and he knocks on my door. He didn't have a pass. Knocks on my door, and he goes, "The voices want to talk to you." And that never happened before. It was always I would talk to the voices through the patient.
Sure.
So it's like, okay, they would tell me what the voices were saying, and I would tell them to say things to the voices. So it was always an intermediary for like 15, 20 years before that. I'd never spoken directly to them. I didn't think I could. I didn't
Right.
think it was possible. But he said the voices want to speak to you, and I'm like, they want to speak to me personally. And he goes, yeah, they want to speak to you personally. So I said, okay, come on in. Let's hear what they have to say. So he sits down, and these words came out of his mouth, and I'll never forget them. They're burned in my memory. He said, you have no right to interfere with our way of life. Boom. It was like, that blew me away. It was like, they are real. They aren't some hallucination. They, and he goes, that wasn't me. I didn't say that.
I
You
was
know,
just going to ask what he did. So,
that's what
yeah.
he said. First thing he said, that wasn't me. That's them. And I said, well, tell them this. He said, I don't have to tell them. They can hear you. They
Oh,
can see you.
gosh.
And I didn't know that
I
either.
would have been running out the door.
Well, that took me by surprise.
You're
So
brave.
it was like a 1-2 punch. It was like bam, bam. And I'm like, whoa, my denial system just complete. It was already in tatters. I mean, I already had so much evidence and information that these things weren't hallucinations, but I didn't want to believe it. I just didn't want to believe it, no matter how much came up. But when that happened, it was like, bam, getting hit in the back of the head with a baseball bat or something. It's like, wake up, buddy. You know. And I just shut down the psych department for that day. I just sat there and stared out the window. And
Wow.
it took me 3 months, 3 or 4 months before I called this guy back again. You know, no, no. The next thing that happened, that was the 3 or 4 months was the next thing. So what I did is I was reading a book by South American shaman Miguel Ruiz, and it was the voice of knowledge. And in it, he was talking about these entities that sucked negative energy out of people. You know, and I'm like, that's exactly what the voices do. So I would I would question these guys about anything, and if one of them told me something I would try it on the other ones. So if one guy says, yeah, after the voices come, my energy's gone, I asked 100 other schizophrenics. Does your energy disappear after they attack you? Yeah, 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 yeah. So it wasn't just based on one person. I mean, once I got it, I would try it out on a bunch of other people and ask them. So all of these patterns are all verified by asking scores of schizophrenics if this has happened to them, and they're all saying yes. Yeah. So
I'm wondering what gives them permission to come in the first place. If it is a spiritual thing, I would imagine God created us to have some sort of protection mechanism. So I guess maybe, like you said earlier, just the trauma that they might have had as a child or in the womb or
well,
wherever.
the trauma, the drugs, you
Oh,
know, um,
drugs. Yeah.
you know, uh, pornography, um, uh, physical, emotional uh, trauma,
Hmm.
uh, you know, that kind of stuff, and meth. I mean, meth is. I've seen more prisoners go psychotic on meth than any other drug. They call it the devil's drug.
And they can't come back from it.
No, no, and what it starts off is they take the meth and they start hearing voices and they go, oh yeah, that's just a hallucination. It'll go away when I come back. When I get off the drug, and it does for a while. Maybe 10, 15, 25 times it may. And then one day it doesn't. They're there forever, and they don't go away. They're just as psychotic as anybody in the mental hospital. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. And it is interesting because they're all sins against the body. They're all sins against, God's creation, whether it's somebody abusing you as a child, whether it's a trauma that you had, whether it's pretty much always something coming in or some sort of sin being involved. And so it would make sense that there would be a way to get the light to them, but like you're saying, if you deliver them and they haven't raised their frequency, they haven't been able to enjoy life or have peace of any kind, where do they even begin?
No, they got to get on a positive spiritual path and stay there.
Right.
If they don't, they're going to slip back. They got to do something there.
Yeah.
But yeah, they drain us all. They get us all. It's not just the schizophrenics. We didn't get to. Did I
Was there
say
another one?
the number of people, the number of kids that they had on antipsychotic drugs? Did I mention that?
Antipsychotic for kids, yeah, I think you said 1 million.
Well, 38 38,000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was
There's
for
a million
anxiety.
kids on there's a million kids on psychiatric drugs.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Now, back to cover a couple of these diagnoses on the DSM.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Here's some diagnoses that are actually in the DSM. Mathematics disorder.
I have that.
I wish I had that. Caffeine intoxication disorder.
So somebody gets like high off caffeine.
Yeah. Yep.
I do that
Sibling
with orange juice. They'll have it
sibling
on there next year.
sibling relational disorder.
Good
Sexual
Lord.
orientation disturbance. That homosexuality. Now, here's a couple of winners. Florence syndrome. Being overwhelmed by beauty, such as Florence Italy's symptoms. Uh, Symptoms include fainting and dizziness, and it's treated with antidepressant drugs.
That's fascinating. Keep going. Let's make up a few too. I can
Okay.
like roll your eyes. Like I do that all the time. I probably have roll your eyes.
Yeah, yeah, the top one is Paris syndrome, mostly suffered by Japanese people visiting France for the first time, which includes depression, anxiety, and feelings of persecution. Um,
What?
yeah, and this would, before the DSM, it would probably be just called cultural shock. You know, so
It's
the,
interesting because
the,
that's kind of what the Gen Z that they name everything, and I'm always like, gosh, they have a name for everything. I just thought that was, we just cope with that. Like, they name it. I guess they're
yeah,
getting it from the therapist.
well, they name it to make it look official.
Right.
So you have this DSM that looks very official with all these big fancy sounding names and all these numbers and these subcategories and all that kind of crap, you know. And then they have all this psychobabble terminology that they like. You look through that DSM and there's these mountains and mountains of psychobabble. It's almost like the psychological equivalent of, legal, what do they call it? Legalese,
Uh-huh.
that kind of
Yes.
stuff.
Yes. Completely different
So
verbiage.
so right now, there's more drugs, psychiatric drugs on this planet than there has ever been in the history of mankind.
And are
Right?
people better?
Let's take a look at that. Okay. Right now, as of 2021, and it's much more right now. In 2021, 48,000 Americans killed themselves, and it's
Wow.
increasing every year. 48,000 in 1 year. 50,000 were killed in Vietnam over
Yeah.
10 years. So it's the loss every year of almost 50,000 American citizens. Right. The CDC reports that 132 people in the US kill themselves every day. And they have access to all these stupid drugs.
Wow. That's
Suicide
more
is
than 2 people per state per day.
Suicide's the 11th leading cause of death in the US. Between 2000 and 2018, suicide rates increased 37%. Between 1999 and 2019, the suicide rate increased 33%, despite the massive increase in antidepressant sales. You know, an estimated 24 veterans are killing themselves daily in the U.S. All right. According to the Center for Disease Control, the U.S. suicide rates have reached the highest level since World War II, in the face of all these psychiatric drugs that they're
Right.
pushing on anybody. Assaults, murders, and shootings are out of control. Prisons are overpopulated. They're budgeting at the seams. Every day you turn on the TV and here's a mass shooting somewhere. And their solution is, oh, take the guns away.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes, that
so
is
looking
their exact solution. I think that's the intention for the whole thing.
well,
We're
that's what
we're gonna we're gonna
that's what they
actually
want.
put this on the news, so that we can take your guns away.
Well, that's their solution. It's not the guns that shoot people. I've
Yeah,
never seen a gun get up and walk up to somebody and shoot them. You
right,
know, So, looking back at over more than 40 years of this mental health system, I mean, it's just lies and propaganda and deceit. Now, the entire Western mental health system is a drug fueled merry-go-round dominated by the high priest of psychiatry and powered by big pharma's expensive toxic drugs, which cure nothing. So, when I was working in the private psychiatric hospitals, these people would go off these drugs all the time because the side effects are so awful.
right.
So they go off the drugs, they go psychotic, they go back into the psych hospital, they rip them off another $8,000, $10,000, put them back on the drugs, set them out, and they do it again. So it was like just this merry-go-round that would go round and round, each time fleecing the taxpayer, the insurance companies, the government of tens of thousands of dollars
So
every
what
time, and
about
it's just going round and round and round and round, going nowhere.
and that's for psychotic. What about like antidepressant or people that are on different things for bipolar or things like that? Do you feel the same way about those? Do you think they're just as worthless?
Well, they're not in as much trouble. Now bipolar can get serious, and oftentimes it's mixed with psychosis, and that's real tough to deal with.
Mhm.
That's very tough to deal with. But like we said, um, these drugs don't cure anything.
Right.
The problem is still there. So even though they might make people feel temporarily a little better, then you got the label saying may increase suicidal ideation. It
Mhm.
doesn't cure the depression. So you
Right.
got to keep taking it over and over and over again to keep that depression down. And then you get something like Wellbutrin, which seems to work half decently. And then you try to get off that stuff. It's worse than trying to get off of heroin.
Oh, man, I did not know that.
Oh yeah, they won't tell you that either. I mean, it's got you. You're not going to get off that without going through some horrible, horrible withdrawal symptoms, similar to those of withdrawing from um, heroin.
Yeah.
You know, so the Western mental health system has no idea how the mind works. They have nothing to do with the spirit. We're spiritual beings. They're treating us like machines. You
Mhm.
know, you know, give these different kind of oil. Put in some transmission fluid and change the soup. You
Right.
know,
You're right. And, I have a question about grounding. I don't know if you're very familiar with it, but, I was watching this incredible video by this young man who has just cleaned up his life, and he was sharing what the experience was like when he decided to go off, alcohol, and he was bad, like, really bad alcoholic. He was saying he was drinking a handle a day, and people didn't believe him, but he said when he went off of it, he didn't know because he was so young, he didn't know that, you should go to the hospital, they should help you with this, you have to do it slowly, and
yeah,
he just went cold turkey.
that you
And
can die from that.
well, and it's an amazing story, like, his story, blew my mind, but one of the things that was so fascinating, he said first he found himself, like, trying to get in the shower, and he'd be shaking, and he was having hallucinations, and
DTS.
he really believes in his heart of hearts that it was, he goes, I think it's God's way of saying, this is what you have in you. It's coming out. Don't do it again. But what he said was he kept trying, and he would just lay in his shower and just let the shower go on him. And the only thing that finally stopped it was
Alcohol.
he dug a hole in the ground, and it felt good to put his feet in it, and he kept digging and digging and digging. Once he got his feet 3 feet in, I think he said, he just it slowly started, like, easing off, and I thought
Oh,
that was
that's interesting.
really
Yeah,
interesting.
because I know the grounding. There's a lot of there's a lot of facts behind it.
Yeah.
But one out of 10 people will die if they go through DTS without medical
Yeah, he
withdrawal.
just didn't know, and he warns
Yeah,
people, he's like he's like, "Don't
yeah.
do what I did. I'm sharing the story so that
Well,
you
that
don't."
that's interesting. The grounding thing. You know.
Yeah. And here's the other thing that I thought was so fascinating. I was watching somebody, and they were saying your blood changes immediately. So if you go outside and ground just for 5 minutes, or they take your blood before you go ground, and then they take your blood afterwards, and it's not as clogged up, it's not all sticking together. It's more, like, separated and smooth, and I just thought it was so fascinating. I try to do it every day for 10 minutes. Who knows if, it does anything. I'm always happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, it's not going to hurt you. That's for sure.
I always consider it my nature bath, though. I, like, commune with the butterflies and the birds, and, just see the
Yeah.
neighbors and stuff.
Nature's good. That's one
Oh,
of the things the voices don't like. These guys just walking out in nature. They don't like them to do anything that's joyful. You know.
it makes so much sense. And so when they talk back to them, like, can someone ignore it?
They can ignore it, but it doesn't go away. They
Yeah.
they they just keep at them. It's like a pest. It's like gnats.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gnats. Yeah, I thought you might be interested in seeing how the high priest compared to the suicide rate of their most regressed patients, the psychotics. So you know they're putting out thousands of these people every year with their fancy diplomas. So you might say that, the suicide rate of a population tells you something about their stability.
Right.
Okay. So, psychotics are killing themselves at a rate, probably 3 to 5 times higher than the general population.
Yeah.
They're not stable.
So sad.
So, so you look at the suicide rate for uh, the general population. National Institute of Mental Health estimated that 4.9% of people with schizophrenia will die by suicide. Their suicide rate is 5 to 10 times that of the general population. Now, you take a look at the suicide rate for the high priest of psychiatry. Okay. AMA, or the Journal of American Medical Association, said the suicide rate for psychiatrists is 65 per 100,000, or 5.9 times that of the general population, and virtually exactly the same as psychotics.
Wow, you reap what you sow. That's crazy.
The Journal of Clinical Psychiatry in August 1980 did a 5-year study of 18,730 consecutive physician deaths by suicide and found that psychiatrists suicide regularly year by year at rates of more than twice expected, and those differences were statistically significant.
Man.
So
And
these are the
so
high.
are they higher than regular doctors or
Oh
dentists or
yeah, yep. Yeah, I
wow.
don't know about dentists,
Okay.
but I know dentists have a high suicide rate too. But these are the people who are running the Western mental health system. They a suicide rate higher than the general population, higher than other doctors, equal to that of their psychotic population.
Do you think it's because they have access to drugs?
Well, I think part of it is they know they're really not curing anybody.
So they do know, they're just kind of hiding it. Because that's what I was asking you earlier.
Yeah, I think they know that they're just tamping down. So these people aren't getting any better. They may feel a little better, but they're really not getting any better. They're not curing anything. You know, and they've been brainwashed ever since college. I mean, they don't know that the Rothschilds took over the medical schools and,
Right. They
and the
haven't
universities.
looked into it.
No, no. So,
But
and you look
something's
at
telling them something's wrong because otherwise they wouldn't have such a high suicide rate.
right, and you look at their popularity. You look at the assaults on all jobs on a study of 120,000 assaults from 1987 to 1992. Over 5 years, reported the assault rate for all jobs. It was 12.6 per thousand. The assault rate for doctors other than psychiatrists was 16.2 per thousand. The assault rate for custody staff that were around psychotics and other mental ill people 24 hours a day is 69 per thousand. The assault rate for psychiatrists who spend maybe 20 minutes to an hour with their patients once every few months is 65 per 1,000, or 5.9 times higher than that of the general population.
Wow.
And I always wondered, what are they doing to these people where they're getting beat up at such a rate, you know, so much higher because they spend so much less time with their people,
Right.
for
So
the most part.
statistically, when you look at, it doesn't even make sense. Oh my gosh. I wonder if they also have a high domestic abuse or anything like that.
I don't know.
That's just
I don't know about that.
That's just sad. There was a psychiatrist in town here that just was supposedly on face value the most amazing person, talented in every way, good looking, blah blah blah. And he literally attacked his pregnant wife and he disappeared, like literally scrubbed him, Jerry. The guy is disappeared from Dallas. Like it's like he never existed. I couldn't find anything about his arrest. It was very bizarre.
Well, I
What are
knew
they doing with these psychiatrists?
I knew one of the psych nurses I worked with, and uh, it was when I was working in the ERs. She was a fairly attractive girl. She was dating one of the psychiatrists, and she was complaining about his porn addiction. You know that he would be in there watching this pornography and she's out there going, what's going on here, you know?
Man, that porn, it opens a portal that I just
It
every
it
time I
it
get a
does.
chance, I tell people stay far, far away from it. It is far more dangerous than you think. It is sex magic. I don't care what anybody says. And I would love to hear your opinions on it as a therapist and just as somebody that works with people on a regular basis
Oh
because it's
shoot,
so
I had one just
70% of people use it.
well, I had one the other day. He was psychotic as a bed bug, and he was just controlled by this stuff. That's what he did all day, and it was like he, with along with it, it controlled his entire life. He said it ruined his life, and it's like there's entities that enter, and it's not just the person watching the porn. You're attracting these entities who are enjoying it also, and they
Mhm.
want more and more of it. It's like alcohol. I remember one day in the prison, there's this kind of evil Indian medicine man got thrown in there. He was an Apache Indian. He came down from up north, and he was so violent that the Apache police couldn't handle him. And I was watching him. He's coming down to my unit. I heard of him ahead of time, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. And I watched him crash through all these places that they usually stop and classify him. He even crashed right through the diagnostic center, ended up on my unit. I called him in the first time, and man, he hated whites. He just hated white people. And I told him, well, I'm your psych. I'll be watching over you. You're going to be uh, on drugs, and I'll be calling you in once a month to see how you're doing. And I could just feel the hatred just pour out of him. You know, so I let him go, and I said, okay, see you next month. And so after several months, it took me 6 months before I could really carry on a conversation with him for like 20 minutes. And he was telling me that he could cast spells on people, that he could see spirits, that he could manipulate spirits, that he was chased by spirits. I mean, here's this whole strange world that he lived in, and he wasn't psychotic. He was very violent, and 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 a chronic alcoholic. And finally, I got the nerve up to ask him one day. I said, "Well, if you can do all this kind of stuff, how come you can't stay off of alcohol?" And he looks at me and he says, "It's because of the spirits of dead alcoholics." And he told me about this one bar in Phoenix, Arizona. He said, if I went anywhere near that bar, he said, I could see these spirits. They were piled up from the top of that bar all the way up into the sky until they disappeared. He said, if I went anywhere near that bar with alcohol in me, he said they would come down and they would try to jump and get in me. And I heard story after story about guys who went to bars. When they hit a certain point, there was other people who could see these spirits jump into them
Oh
when
gosh.
when they hit a certain point, and then they would start drinking. So it's not just that person who is drinking or drugging.
Yeah.
It's these entities who have entered them and are
They
demanding that
opened the portal. They gave permission
they
through free
gave
will.
they gave they didn't know it,
Right.
but they did.
Right.
And it's not just them using the drugs. It's these spirits who are earthbound spirits who can no longer drink alcohol because they're in a spiritual form, so they can't get drunk anymore. They have to get into somebody who can in
Right.
order to enjoy being high again, or or to get that drunken feeling.
Man. And so going back to the porn thing, what are some things that you would some advice you'd have for anyone that is kind of in the clutches of it?
Well, it's not just you watching that stuff. You know that it's it's an addiction. Something else is controlling it.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because one of the things that I've interviewed a lot of survivors of really traumatic things, and I've also um, just watching what happened with the um, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp case, and they had the feces in the bed, and then another person had the feces in the bed that I had talked to, it's they get so twisted, like they begin doing filthy things. And it's common in those really, really dark places to
Yeah.
not only include sex, but like peeing on people and going to the bathroom on them. It's just
It's
nasty.
sick. It's these negative energies. The worst I've ever heard of was one of the attendants on. He was a good friend of mine. We rode motorcycles together when I worked at the state hospital. He said there was this one guy, psychotic as a bedbug. You know, basically a human skeleton with skin draped over him. He's standing completely naked at the window of the unit of the psych unit, and he's looking out completely naked. And so this attendant calls him back down, and he walks up to him, and he craps in his hand with diarrhea, and he takes it and he puts it in his mouth, and he says, "Good boy, good boy." Like
Like
that
the voice was
entity was
saying,
talking
"Thank
to
you."
him and saying, "Yeah, good boy,
And
good
think
boy."
about how really what it is and this, if to me, if your job can't make somebody a religious person, I don't know what job could, but like to me, it's just how can we defile this beautiful being that God made? What are the most disgusting things that I can do to it? How can I put it in a mind trap? How can I make it disgusting? I mean, it's just kind of where it goes. But that's, oh my gosh, the whole good boy too. Oh,
And they absolutely hate children. They hate children. They that you know some of the biggest battles I've seen is between the mother's maternal instinct and the voices telling her to harm her child. You know, and I'm virtually convinced that there is no genetic transmission between the mother and the child. It's the schizophrenic creates the conditions in the child for these things to thrive, and
sure.
then they jump over into the kid. You know, but one thing was real interesting. I was talking to one guy who was hearing voices, and he said the voices hate the sound of babies laughing. And I found that real interesting. I said, "Well, where'd you
They
learn
don't
that?"
like
He said,
innocence. They don't like what a
"Yeah, they
true
don't like
human,
innocence." He
like a
said,
true human joy, anything beautiful and lovely,
"Yes,
and all of the
exactly."
things the Bible says we should be focusing on.
Yeah, he went to what was it? The one the Chinese. Um, it's not Twitter. It's
Oh,
where they
TikTok.
TikTok. He would go to TikTok and he would look up pictures of babies laughing, and he would torment the voices by watching those videos. They hated it. I
Was he
found
was
that
he
very.
doing that on purpose? Was he
He was
trying to
doing it
prank
on
the
purpose to
voices?
get back at the voices. Yeah.
And does it that's a great idea, actually. Like, to just like you said, like the 23rd Psalm, the 91st Psalm, the joyful babies laughing, it is a vibration.
Yeah.
Babies have great
Yeah.
vibrations.
Yeah.
Dogs have great vibrations.
Comedy. They can't stand comedy. They don't want you laughing at anything. They want you to be
Oh,
down all the
that's so
time.
good, and it makes so much sense because they're trying to cancel all the comedians now.
Exactly, and that's kind of yeah, exactly. So I'm telling you, it's the same entity on a macroscopic scale. You look at the mainstream media, what they're feeding us. It's these patterns that the same patterns that the schizophrenics are running.
Yeah.
Those people are psychopaths.
Yeah.
They're
Okay, so
running the
I
government.
wanna make sure I ask you this before you go too, is do you think at some level people want to keep it? So, somebody's depressed and there's a payoff, or somebody's anxious and there's a payoff, or somebody's, borderline and there's a payoff. Like, do you think some of them subconsciously desire the outcomes that they get from it?
Yeah, there's some of them who do, and you can't do anything with them. You're wasting your time. Yeah, and there's some of the voices. They'll tell you, "I'm not leaving. I'm staying here. I was assigned to destroy this person. I'm not going anywhere." Some of the lesser ones you can talk out. If you can talk them out and get them to go into the light, they disappear forever, and that voice won't come back. You
That's
know,
so beautiful. I love
but
that.
that's what these spirit releaser guys do.
Mhm.
But if they don't change their vibration and start getting on some kind of spiritual path and stay there, you know, these things will catch up with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do believe, I believe that there's something about purity. And it's funny because I never thought about purity when I was younger. I just want to go have fun, you know? And, but now, I feel like it's like the answer to a lot of things, you know, because it's the exact opposite of that microcosm that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And, you know, innocence, beauty, purity, and happiness, and all of those things. So, and so what do you do to balance your life out?
Oh boy, it needs more balance, because I'm supposed to be retired, but
Right.
then I get all these people, well, you got to help me, you got to help me, and and then I learned the mace thing, so I'm back to working again. So I ride motorcycles, I go hiking, I take some trips. You know, I I need to escape from here a whole lot more.
Yeah.
Um, but here in Tucson in the summer, right now it's 108 degrees outside.
Oh, I know. It's hot here too. That's why I've been wearing my hats a lot. Just get that sun out of my eyes.
Where you're up north somewhere, aren't you?
No, I'm in Dallas.
Oh, you're in Dallas.
I'm
I,
from the Chicago area.
that's where I thought you were.
Yeah, no, that's funny. Maybe you could just read my energy or my
I,
voice or
yeah,
something.
I always thought you were from Chicago.
Yeah. Well, maybe I told you at some point that I was. I don't know. I don't recall that though.
Yeah, I don't know where I got that idea.
Well,
I just went.
you were right. And so, how do you keep yourself from spinning in, "Oh, I heard the voice. I'm outside. I'm cutting the thing. I heard the voice." How do you keep yourself from like really kind of going, "Oh crap, I've seen where that goes. Like, is this an entity coming to me?" Or do you just have
Well,
such authority over them you're not afraid of them?
well, I'm not afraid of them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's times where I have been terrified by them. I mean, absolutely terrified. I didn't finish that story in the prison where the guy came back, and when I read him the uh, segment of Miguel Ruiz's book that said these things were energy parasites, I mean, he turned into a zombie. He just started staring at me like a zombie, and then the walls of my office started crackling like a arc welder. Just crack, crack, crack all the way up the right wall. And I'm looking at him and looking at this crack, and I don't see anything, but you could hear it moving. And it lasted for like 30 seconds. It wasn't short. And, I was afraid to take my eyes off of him because I thought he was going to attack. And I pushed my chair back against the wall. And this thing crackled right over his head, then crackled down the left wall and
So could
jumped
you
into the.
see it
I
also?
couldn't see it. I couldn't see anything. I
But you
could
could
just
just
hear
like
it.
hear, yeah, you could just hear where it was.
I could follow it by the sound, but it's like crack, 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 just like an arc welder. And then across the top and then down the side. And then it hit my feet in the trash can. I looked in the trash can, there wasn't anything there. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I look at him and I thought he's going to attack. And he gets up and he goes, I got to leave. And he walks out and I'm like, get the hell out of here.
So that was
Um,
the Indian guy?
no, that was a different guy.
Oh, that was the one from earlier that you were talking about.
Yeah, and
Wow.
I didn't see him again. I didn't want to see him again for like 3 or 4 months. Finally, I called him back, and he looked good. And I'm like, I was surprised. I thought he'd be a wreck. And I said, you look good. What have you been doing? He said, well, I've been doing the stuff you told me to kind of beat down the voices. I haven't got rid of them, but I'm keeping them under control. All right. So I said, we did some small talk and I said, do you remember the last time you were in here? Did you hear that crackling going around the office? He said, yeah, I did. But he said, I was surprised you did. And I said, what was that? And he said, that was them. I said, them who? The voices? He said, yeah, that was the voices. And I asked, well, what in the blazes were they doing? He said, they were trying to scare you off. And I said, well, they did one hell of a job of it, you know.
Right?
And then I asked him, I said, you looked really strange when you left the office. I mean, you looked like a zombie. I said, what were they telling you when you were walking out of the office? He said, they were telling me to go get a knife and stick it in your gut. And I'd like, oh, he wouldn't have done that. I worked with him for 6 months. He wouldn't have done anything like that. And I asked him then, well, then why didn't you do it? He said, I couldn't find one and nobody would give me one.
Wow.
Yeah. And then in the ER, boy, I've had some there. I mean, because they're coming in raw off the streets. Psychotic as bed bugs, full of meth, full of alcohol. There were some real scary ones in there.
You would worry about, like, the nurses and stuff too.
I watched one time. This was amazing. Where I was doing a psych eval on this one crazy lady who was in this side room, and she couldn't see the nursing station from where she was.
Sure.
So all of a sudden she jumps up, she tears out the door, and she heads for this one nurse, like a bee, straight for her, like she was targeting this one, and she couldn't have seen her. She couldn't
Wow.
even know that. And that nurse didn't say anything to her, didn't have any interactions to her. She jumped up on the thing and started attacking this nurse. They had to pull her off that nurse, like she could see through the wall something about this nurse she didn't like. You know,
That's why I'm telling you, don't do porn. Don't be getting addicted to drugs. It isn't worth where it could go, man. It is frightening.
goes to very dark places.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you've had voices, you've had phenomenon happening, and then you've also, I remember you told a story about somebody being like really strong, and like it was like a little guy, and
Oh
that there
yeah.
was like big guards, and that he was just bouncing them around like popcorn. Have you had any other like almost paranormal like experiences?
Well, the greatest one that happened at the prison was in a kind of semi-maximum security unit in Florence.
Mhm.
And there was this psychotic prisoner. He was a big one. He was in a cell by himself, crazy as a bed bug, big, strong guy. And the guards, they're all these, a lot of them are these, macho guys that, are getting off on their authority. Not all of them. There's a fair amount of decent ones, but there's the rabble rousers that cause a
Right.
lot of trouble that way. They're like these macho guys. I got control and I'm the guard and all this stuff. Well, they went to move this guy. They wanted to move him to another cell, and he goes, I'm not moving." And they said, "What do you mean you're not moving? Cuff up. Stick your hands out at the cell and cuff up. I'm not moving." So they said, "Well, we're going to have to pepper spray you." So he goes, "Fine." You know. So they got out they had like quart cans of pepper spray. I don't know if you've ever been around that stuff.
No,
It is nasty.
I've
You
been
don't
around
want,
bear spray, but I haven't been around
it's kind
pepper.
of the same stuff.
Yeah,
It's very
it's
nasty stuff.
very strong.
Yeah, one spray in the face and you're done. I mean, you're done. They have these quart cans, these big spray cans, big things, and they put them up and they said, "You come out or we're going to spray you." So he said, "Screw you," and he puts a towel around his face when they start spraying him and blocks most of it, but it's dripping down him. It's all over the cell. They sprayed him so bad it came out and got them, and their eyes were tearing up. And they said, "Now come out." And now these three cells of tears are watching the show. So now they're engaged. The guards can't look bad because they're looking bad. This guy's telling them to screw off and challenge their authority. So now the big show is on. All these hundreds of prisoners are watching what's going on down there. The guards couldn't let this guy win. So they said, "You come out of there. We're going to go get the stun guns." He said, "Go get your crappy stun guns, you bunch of sissy asses." He's mocking them and putting them down and insulting them. And, you know, "You want me out? You come in and get me out." None of them are going to do that at this point. So they got the stun guns, and these are 50,000 volts. You know, I, I've seen the biggest prisoners go down. They fired like a wire, and there was like this little arrow or something on the tip, and it would go into their skin and deliver that 50,000-volt charge, and it would knock the biggest guys down just like that. I mean, they just fall over. They'd be out. And so they said, "Come on out, or we're going to shoot. We're going to stun gun you." So he said, "Screw you." and he's standing there in the cell, in the middle of the cell, and they hit him with that thing, and he's just quivering. He's just quivering. That gun discharged, and he's just quivering. And then when he stops, they said, "Come on out." He goes, "You come in and get me, you bunch of sissies." And he's mocking them and making fun of them. So they went and got a second one. So they shot him with the second one. So there's two of them in him now. One is discharging while the other one's charging. So they hit him 13 times before the warden came down and said, "Stop it, because they're going to get me for cruel and unusual punishment." 13 times, and this guy just stood there and shivered.
So it was supernatural.
That's no human that I knew of could do that.
Gosh.
And that wasn't the end of it. So they tell him to come on out, and he goes, "You come in and get me, you bunch of pansy boys." He's mocking them, making fun of them. "You want me out? Come in and get me out." They could have turned off the water and not fed him. He would eventually, no, they had to do this drama scene. So they said, you come out of there, we're going to get the dog. And these attack dogs they had were vicious. I mean, they would just rip you to pieces. They were like wolves. I mean, they were trained to do this, and the prisoners were terrified of them.
I
They
would
were
be.
more afraid of the dogs than they were these stun guns. So he said, "Go get your dog," and so they went and got the dog, and they gave him a chance. "Okay, come on out, or we're going to sick the dog on you." So he's sitting on his bed, and they sick the dog on him. The dog runs in there, and he throws up his hand in front of his face, and the dog grabs onto his wrist and sinks his teeth all the way down to the bone. So this guy's gushing blood, and he pulls the dog up to his face, and he goes, "Sit." And the dog sat, but it didn't let go of his arm. And then he starts petting the dog, going, "Nice puppy,
Oh,
nice puppy."
that's so evil. Like,
And
that's so evil.
and the dog's still hanging on to him, but he's sitting, and the dog handler's going, "What in the blazes is going on in there?" And the guards grabbed, so they had a rope on the dog, and the dog didn't let go, so they pulled him out of the cell into the cell block, and then they beat the crap out of them, and then they moved him.
Oh my
True
gosh.
story.
I believe you. I believe you. And so the prison, was it a special prison where it had mostly people that were crazy, or you just worked there in case
No,
somebody crazy came in?
they were spread out throughout the population.
Okay.
They
Do you think that's a good idea?
well, putting them all in one place would cause a lot of trouble. I would not want to be their roommate.
I didn't think about that, but I also wouldn't want to be, I don't know, like somebody in there for, robbing somebody when they're 18 years old and in with some guy that's got
Yeah.
entities attached to him.
Yep.
Although,
I've seen that too. Yeah. That's where
and
I
the sad
learned.
part is it's somebody's child. Like, it was born and normal and perfect at one point, and enough happened that it just went so far away from the light and the goodness. It's crazy.
Well, those prisons are the devil's. They're the devil's workshop. I mean, I remember Sherry saying she was sending love into the prisons, and this this dark, smoky entity appeared while she was doing this, and said, "These people are mine. You stay out of this." And from working there for 17 years, those prisons aren't doing anybody any good. Those
No,
people are
no.
coming out of there in much worse shape than they ever went in. It's like graduate school for criminology.
Yes,
You
I
know,
agree with you.
they used to have vocational programs. They used to have, high school programs, that kind of stuff. And these private prisons are even worse. They're much worse. They have nothing for these people. They're just human holding tanks. You know,
Yeah.
it's the devil's workshop. You could feel it when you walked in there. You could just feel it. It was like, oh,
I feel that way walking into a hospital. I've been into prisons too, because when I was with the charity that I worked with, that I helped found, we went into a couple of prisons and we spoke to the kids and stuff. But they were youth prisons, and it's still there's something. And when I say there's a vibe, there's a vibe, and
there is
and
a vibe.
also there's a smell. And I don't know if you agree with this, but there's a smell, and there's also a smell in hospitals. And there's one more place I was thinking of, but I forgot. Oh, it's very bizarre, but movie theaters smell so bizarre to me. Like, I don't know why, because it doesn't seem like a dark place that, things like, hospitals where there's a lot of death and prisons where there's a lot of, rage and yeah, it's wild.
No, there's it's so bizarre because they if somebody escapes from prison, it hits the papers and everybody's freaked out. Oh, there's a murderer on the loose. Hey, he might pop into my door. He might get in my window anytime. It's like they don't understand that there's 20 murderers being released normally because they finished their sentence and
Hmm.
and they're in much worse shape than when they came in. Nothing has fixed them.
No,
They haven't done any therapy. They haven't done anything to help.
no,
They're just being released onto the streets free, given $50 and saying, "Okay, you're free.
yeah.
You're out of here."
Yeah, when we had
I've
our
s-
charity, the first thing we did with them was we took them to Deliverance, if they wanted to. Like, we wouldn't make them do it, but it was a very effective way of kind of getting them acclimated afterwards. Because see, there's this time lapse. So like they go into jail, and then there's all these years that go by, and fashion changes, and they age, and all
oh
kinds of stuff,
yeah, they
and then
come
they
out into
come
a
out,
totally different society than they went in.
culture's totally
Yep.
different, and
Yeah.
so there's an acclimation. We next time you come on, if you ever do again, I hope you do, we should do a whole thing on prisons, because
Oh yeah.
that's there's so much there, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think if any politician was smart, they would take that on. There's a lot of people that shouldn't be in jail, um, but then there's a good portion
Oh,
that
it
that
ruins their lives. I mean, they don't come out of there the same person as they went in.
right. And
You know.
imagine if you were doing mace with people there, you know
Oh, it would help them
it would.
tremendously.
Yeah, so many of them are just, they'd been abused, or they didn't have love, or whatever.
Oh yeah, I mean, May should be in all. I mean, it should be in all the mental. It should be the standard instead of psychiatry.
Yeah, yeah,
It actually works. And I mean, it works. They got something that works, and they're totally ignoring it. They don't want to upset the established system that they have.
yeah. I don't know. I believe that that's why people like you and I connect, and JCK and all these different people that are doing their different thing in different parts of the world. I believe we are building that positive grassroots thing. And it's, I think, going to hit certain points where it's going to have compound value. It's just going to come back bigger and bigger. And people are aware now. I mean, if they're having to shut you down, imagine how many Jerrys there are. Like, there's people out there telling all kinds of different information. Dr. Kaufman got kicked off for a while. He was really hard to find for a while.
Yeah,
If you ever talk to him, tell him I think he's a brilliant and very good man, and we need more like him for sure.
yeah, yeah. He's a good one. He's one of the good guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like him. And so, is there anything that you'd like to share with everybody before we close out?
What That's the first thing that always comes to mind is just realize that not all thoughts that come into your head belong to you.
Beautiful.
Every negative thought about yourself or anybody else does not come from you. You know, Nobody's ever found a thought in anybody's brain. They never pulled it out, put it on the table, and go, "Here it is. We see it." We're spiritual beings.
Yeah.
Your spirit is energy. You're an energetic being, and you have a whole lot more potential than you'll ever realize if society didn't keep putting you down.
Yeah. And that's another thing. I mean, just being kind to one another, um, giving people the benefit of the doubt, being friends with people that maybe you shouldn't be because they don't have anyone else. And I'm not saying that's the main person you hang out with, but I think sometimes people get, oh, I'm a Christian now, I can't hang out with this person, or I'm this or I'm a Democrat and I can't hang. I just think we need to spend more time together and encourage and help each other.
Yeah, agreed. Just realize you're a spiritual being. You're a
Yeah.
lot more powerful than you think.
Yeah. And you do have a website, and you do have a book. You want to tell everybody the name of your book again?
Uh, Here it is. It's an amazing journey into the psychotic mind, breaking the spell of the ivory tower. So you want to know what the voices are and how we came to the conclusion of what they were, and it's here. You know,
And where is Sherry?
Sherry's in Kentucky.
Oh, okay. So
You know,
she's in the US.
she's in the U.S. You
Okay.
know, um,
How did you two meet?
oh, we've been friends for like 35 years. I mean,
Oh, okay.
while I was developing programs in the prison, she had one of the biggest prison rehabilitation sites, there
Oh,
was. And she was
okay.
trying to do something about the prisons too. And we met that way. And I knew her for 10 years before she told me that she heard voices. So I was telling her about some of the patients I was working with in the prison, and
Mhm.
I'm like, I can't figure this out. I don't know what's happening here. She goes, I know what's happening here. and I started grilling her, like I hit her with all these questions that only somebody who was hearing voices
Would
could have
know.
answered correctly. And
Sure.
she's like, bam, 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 bam. She knocked them all off one after another. And after a while, we got to let the world know about this. So
That's awesome.
it
I'm
took us.
glad you did. I'm glad you did, and I'm glad that you went through the MACE training, and I appreciate you sharing your wisdom with everybody. It's you're a beautiful person, and I'm thankful there's good guys like you who are willing to buck the system and be put in YouTube jail.
Yeah, YouTube jail. I've made it. I've finally made it.
I'm
It's
probably next
a,
since I had you on.
a badge of honor.
Well, at least you get to come back. So, and do you have a backup channel?
No. My website is jerrymarzinsky.com.
Yeah, I have it scrolling on the bottom there. And then I was going to say that Rumble has been wonderful. They also have where you can have it auto sync to where all of your stuff, anytime you put something up on YouTube, it will roll up there. And if you think it's something that might get you kicked off, you can just take it off of YouTube once it's landed on Rumble, and then you'll have it someplace where it might not get you a strike or
Oh,
whatever.
well, I post on Rumble all the time anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you
So,
could just get it synced up, and you could have it both content.
huh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to do too because I did it. I have no technological skills at all. That and math. It's some new DMS thing.
Yeah, math. I'm, I'm on the other end of the math scale. And it's weird because a, a great majority of my friends are engineers, so it's like opposites attract. It's like weird, and I can't talk to them about this kind of stuff, but I can talk to them about all the engineering stuff. You
Yeah.
know, but they just, for the most part, they just don't understand this stuff.
Well, it's a totally different type of brain. It's a different side of the brain and stuff. So that completely makes sense. But that's why God made so many different kinds of us. And so I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for coming. And thanks everybody for being here. I don't know when I'll be back. I think next week I have one. So we'll talk to y'all later.
All right,
Bye
thanks for
everyone.
having me on.
Yeah, of course.